A millionaire takes his daughter to the park, and a little beggar shouts, "Shadam's my twin sister." The millionaire is stunned to see the little girl is identical to his daughter. What he does next is astonishing. What he does next is truly surprising. The autumn breeze rustled through Central Park's colorful leaves as Alexander Thompson checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. At 45, the tech mogul had mastered the art of managing billion-dollar deals, but felt strangely nervous about spending an afternoon with his 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. Their relationship had always been distant, marked by brief encounters between his endless business meetings and international flights. "Daddy, look at the ducks!" Sophie's excited voice pulled him from his thoughts. Her copper-brown hair caught the sunlight as she ran toward the pond, her expensive dress swaying with each step. Alexander couldn't help but smile. She reminded him so much of her mother. "Be careful, sweetheart," he called out, quickening his pace to catch up with her. This afternoon was supposed to be different. After his executive assistant pointed out that he had missed Sophie's last 3 school events, Alexander cleared his entire schedule for what he hoped would be a turning point in their relationship. The park was busy with families enjoying the pleasant weather. Children played on the grass while parents chatted on nearby benches. It all seemed so normal, so far removed from the high-stakes world Alexander usually inhabited. He watched as Sophie tossed breadcrumbs to the eager ducks, her laughter echoing across the water. "Would you like some ice cream?" he asked, spotting a vendor nearby. Sophie's eyes lit up with excitement, and for a moment, Alexander felt like he was finally doing something right. As they walked toward the ice cream cart, he noticed other parents watching them. He was used to being recognized. His face had graced countless magazine covers, but something about their gazes made him uncomfortable. Sophie was debating between chocolate and strawberry when Alexander felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. A commotion near the playground caught his attention. A small figure was moving through the crowd, pointing and shouting something he couldn't quite make out. "She's my sister, my twin sister." The words finally reached him, clear and sharp, cutting through the ambient park noise. A young girl, no older than Sophie, emerged from the crowd. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her feet bare against the park's paved pathway. But what struck Alexander wasn't her disheveled appearance. It was her face. The girl could have been Sophie's reflection in a grimy mirror. The same copper-brown hair, though tangled and unkempt, the same delicate features, though smudged with dirt. Even their eyes matched, an unusual shade of hazel that Alexander had always thought Sophie inherited from her mother. Sophie dropped her ice cream cone, frozen in place as she stared at her doppelganger. The strange girl moved closer, her eyes wide with recognition and something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation. "I knew it! I knew I'd find you!" the girl exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen you in the newspapers with him." She pointed at Alexander. "I kept telling everyone at St. Mary's that you looked just like me, but nobody believed." "Me?" Alexander's mind raced. St. Mary's, the orphanage on the other side of the city. He'd donated to their charity gala last Christmas, but had never visited the facility. This had to be some sort of scam, he told himself, an elaborate ruse, orchestrated by someone hoping to exploit his wealth and position. But then the girl pulled down the collar of her threadbare shirt, revealing a small birthmark on her left collarbone. Alexander felt his blood run cold. Sophie had the exact same mark in the exact same place, a detail that had never been published in any magazine or newspaper. "This is ridiculous," he managed to say, though his voice lacked conviction. "Sophie, we're leaving." He reached for his daughter's hand, but Sophie remained rooted in place, her eyes fixed on the other girl. "Dad, wait," Sophie whispered. "Look at her mark, it's just like mine." The crowd around them had grown larger, phones appearing to capture the scene. Alexander could already imagine the headlines. Tech billionaire confronted by mysterious street child. His PR team would have a field day managing this crisis. But as he looked between the two girls, one in designer clothes, the other in rags, yet mirror images of each other, he felt something deeper than concern for his public image. A nagging doubt began to take root in his mind, accompanied by memories of the day Sophie was born, the confusion in the delivery room, the sedated state of his wife, The doctors rushed explanations. "What's your name?" Sophie asked the girl, her voice gentle and curious. "Sarah," the girl replied, a slight tremor in her voice. "I've been looking for you for so long." Alexander watched as his perfectly ordered world began to unravel. In all his years of building his tech empire, he had learned to trust his instincts. Right now, those instincts were screaming that there was more to this encounter than a simple coincidence. A crowd had gathered around them, their whispers growing louder with each passing moment. Security guards from the park were approaching, probably alerted by concerned onlookers. Alexander knew he had to take control of the situation before it spiraled further, but for the first time in years, he felt completely out of his depth. The two girls continued to stare at each other, seeming to communicate without words in a way that sent chills down Alexander's spine. In that moment, standing in the middle of Central Park with his carefully constructed world threatening to collapse around him, he made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Mrs. Martinez, the Thompson household's head housekeeper, for the past 12 years, was arranging fresh flowers in the main hall when she heard the commotion at the front door. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing a sight that made her drop the crystal vase she was holding. It shattered on the marble floor, but she barely noticed. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Thompson, looking more disheveled than she had ever seen him. Sophie stood beside him, clutching his hand. But what caused Mrs. Martinez's shock was the third figure, a girl who could have been Sophie's mirror image, except for her worn clothes and untamed hair. "Mrs. Martinez," Alexander's voice carried an edge she had never heard before. "Please prepare the blue guest room and find some clean clothes that might fit our visitor." The housekeeper's hands trembled as she bent to pick up the broken pieces of crystal. Her mind raced back to that night at the hospital, memories she had spent years trying to suppress. The confusion in the delivery ward, the whispered conversations, the sight of two bundles being whisked away in different directions. "Right away, Mr. Thompson," she managed to say, her voice barely steady. As she hurried up the grand staircase, she could hear Sophie's excited chatter echoing through the foyer. "You can stay in the room next to mine. It's painted blue, and you can see the garden from the windows. Do you like gardens, Sarah?" Sarah, so that was the girl's name. Mrs. Martinez paused at the top of the stairs, watching as the strange child took in her surroundings with wide-eyed wonder. The chandelier's light caught her face at an angle that made the resemblance to Sophie even more striking. In the kitchen, Mrs. Martinez found herself automatically preparing hot chocolate, Sophie's favorite comfort drink. Her hands moved mechanically, while her mind wandered to that fateful night 10 years ago. She had been younger then, new to her position in the Thompson household. Mrs. Thompson had insisted she be present at the birth, saying she trusted her more than any relative. The delivery had been complicated. There had been a flurry of activity, doctors speaking in urgent whispers. Mrs. Thompson had been heavily sedated, and Mr. Thompson was away on business, trying desperately to reach the hospital in time. In the chaos, Mrs. Martinez had seen something, or thought she had seen something, that had haunted her for years. 2 babies. She was certain there had been 2. But when she tried to ask questions, the medical staff had been dismissive. 1 baby, they insisted. Only 1. Mrs. Thompson had been too weak to discuss anything, and within months she had passed away, taking any possibility of answers with her. Now, carrying a tray with 3 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, Mrs. Martinez descended the stairs. She found the unlikely trio in the library, where Sarah was staring in awe at the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "I love reading," Sarah was saying, her voice soft but eager. "At St. Mary's, they let us use the library after homework. I've read every book they have, even the big ones with small print." Sophie beamed. "I love reading too. Dad built this library for Mum. He keeps adding more books every year, even though—" She trailed off, her expression clouding momentarily. Alexander sat in his leather armchair, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished. He hadn't touched his phone once since arriving home, a first in Mrs. Martinez's memory. Instead, he watched the girls with an intensity that suggested his brilliant mind was working overtime, processing possibilities he had never considered. "Mrs. Martinez," he called out suddenly, making her jump. You were there, weren't you, the night Sophie was born? The question she had dreaded for 10 years hung in the air. Mrs. Martinez set down the tray, buying herself a moment to steady her nerves. Both girls turned to look at her, their identical hazel eyes filled with curiosity. Yes, sir, she replied carefully. I was there. Tell me everything you remember, Alexander demanded, then added more gently, please. Every detail could be important. Mrs. Martinez sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly weak. The girls gathered closer, sensing the importance of the moment. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the library's tall windows. In the golden light, the similarities between Sophie and Sarah seemed even more pronounced. As Mrs. Martinez began to speak, she felt the weight of a decade's silence lifting from her shoulders. But with that relief came a new anxiety. The truth once spoken could never be taken back, and this truth had the power to reshape not just the Thompson family, but the lives of everyone connected to them. As Mrs. Martinez's story unfolded in Bash, the dimly lit library, Alexander Thompson felt his world shifting beneath his feet. Each word she spoke seemed to illuminate another piece of a puzzle he never knew existed. The housekeeper's voice trembled as she recounted the events of that fateful night, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The delivery room was chaotic, she continued, her eyes distant with remembrance. Mrs. Thompson, Elena, was having complications. The doctors were speaking in hushed tones, moving quickly. I remember standing in the corner trying to stay out of the way, but Elena had made me promise not to leave. Sophie and Sarah sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, their identical faces rapt with attention. The setting sun cast long shadows through the library windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that matched the weight of the moment. There was a moment, Mrs. Martinez said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, when I saw them. 2 nurses hurried past me, each carrying a bundle. I clearly remember thinking how strange it was that they were going in different directions, but when I tried to follow one of them, a doctor stopped me, saying I needed to stay with Eleanor. Alexander leaned forward in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Why didn't you tell me this before? Mrs. Martinez's eyes filled with tears. I tried, Mr. Thompson. The day after, when you finally arrived at the hospital, I attempted to speak with you, but the doctors had already told you about the successful delivery of your daughter, and you were so relieved, so happy. Then, when Elena's condition worsened. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Alexander remembered those days all too well. His wife's rapid decline had consumed every thought, every moment. By the time Elena passed away 3 months later, the joy of Sophie's birth had become inextricably tangled with the grief of losing his wife. There's more, Mrs. Martinez said, reaching into her apron pocket. She withdrew an aged envelope, its edges worn soft with time. Elena gave this to me the day before she left us. She made me promise to keep it safe, to give it to you when the time was right. I've carried it with me every day since then, waiting for a sign that it was time. Alexander took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed and his name was written across the front in Elena's elegant handwriting. He stared at it for a long moment, memories of his wife's touch, her smile, her voice flooding back. Dad? Sophie's gentle voice broke through his reverie. Aren't you going to open it? Sarah remained silent, but her eyes were fixed on the envelope with an intensity that spoke volumes. Alexander realized that this letter might hold answers not just for him, but for both these girls who shared his wife's features. With careful movements, he broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. Elena's familiar handwriting filled the page, though he could see places where tears had fallen, smudging the ink. My dearest Alexander, he read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. If you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I wasn't strong enough to tell you the truth myself. I've been having dreams, Alexander. Dreams of 2 heartbeats, 2 sets of kicks. The doctors dismiss my concerns, tell me I'm being paranoid, but a mother knows. He paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. There's something wrong here. The day of the delivery is mostly a blur, but I remember hearing 2 distinct cries. When I asked about it, they sedated me again. Alexander, if I'm right, if my instincts are correct, You must promise me you'll find out the truth. Our family deserves to be whole." The letter continued, but Alexander's voice failed him. Mrs. Martinez quietly took the paper from his hands and continued reading, her voice steady despite the tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm writing this because I feel myself growing weaker each day, and I'm afraid I won't have the strength to investigate myself. The doctors say it's just postpartum depression, but I know it's more than that. It's the weight of this secret, this terrible uncertainty that's crushing me." Sophie had moved to sit on the arm of her father's chair, her small hand finding his. Sarah remained where she was, but her posture had changed, becoming more rigid, as if bracing herself for what might come next. "I've left a trail," Mrs. Martinez read on. "In my blue jewelry box. There's a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside you'll find everything I managed to discover before I became too weak to continue. Alexander, my love, if I'm wrong about all of this, then burn this letter and forget my paranoid ramblings. But if I'm right..." The letter ended there, the final words trailing off into a shaky line. The silence that followed was profound, broken, only by the ticking of the ancient grandfather clock in the corner and the distant sound of traffic beyond the mansion's walls. Alexander finally looked up, his face set with determination. "Mrs. Martinez, where is Elena's jewelry box?" "In the master bedroom's walk-in closet, sir. Top shelf behind her winter scarves. She made me promise never to move it." He stood abruptly, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Sophie, Sarah, stay here with Mrs. Martinez. I need to..." He stopped, noticing the identical looks of protest forming on both girls' faces. "Please, Dad," Sophie pleaded. "We deserve to know too." Sarah nodded in agreement, speaking up for the first time since Mrs. Martinez had begun her story. "She was my mother too. If what we think is true..." Alexander looked between the two girls, seeing Eleanor in both their faces. How had he not noticed before? The way they both tilted their heads when asking a question, the same determined set of their jaws, all Elena's mannerisms perfectly replicated in two small bodies. The walk to the master bedroom felt longer than usual, each step weighted with anticipation. Alexander hadn't changed anything in this room since Elena's passing, preserving it like a museum to their shared life. Her perfume bottles still lined the vanity, her favorite books still stacked neatly on the bedside table. The girls followed close behind, their footsteps eerily synchronized on the hardwood floors. Mrs. Martinez brought up the rear, carrying the letter like a precious artifact. As Alexander opened the closet door, the familiar scent of Elena's favorite lavender sachets wafted out, bringing with it a flood of memories. "The winter scarves," Mrs. Martinez reminded him gently, pointing to the highest shelf. Alexander reached up, his fingers finding the soft wool of Elena's collection. Behind them, partially hidden in the shadows, sat a dusty blue box with silver filigree. His hands trembled slightly as he brought it down, remembering how Elena used to open it every evening to choose her jewelry for the next day. They gathered around the bed as he placed the box in the center of the cream-colored duvet. The key was exactly where Elena had said it would be, tucked into a small velvet pocket inside the lid. Along with it was a folded piece of paper with an account number written in Elena's handwriting. "First National Bank," Alexander murmured, checking his watch. "It's nearly closing time. I know the branch manager," Mrs. Martinez offered. "Maria Delgado. We grew up together. I could call her. Ask her to wait." Alexander nodded gratefully, and Mrs. Martinez stepped into the hallway with her phone. Sophie and Sarah remained focused on the box, their expressions mirror images of curiosity and apprehension. "There's something else in here," Sarah pointed out, reaching carefully into the box. She withdrew a small photo, its edges worn with age. It showed a much younger Elena, her stomach swollen with pregnancy, standing in what appeared to be a doctor's office. She was smiling at the camera, one hand resting protectively over her belly. "I've never seen this picture before," Sophie whispered, leaning closer. Alexander took the photo, studying it carefully. The date stamp in the corner caught his eye. It was from an appointment just 2 weeks before the delivery. But what made his breath catch was the ultrasound image partially visible on the screen behind Elena. Even to his untrained eye, there seemed to be more than one shape in the grainy image. Mrs. Martinez returned, slightly breathless. "Maria will... Wait, she says she can give us 15 minutes after closing, but no more." "We need to go now," Alexander decided, carefully replacing everything in the box except the key and bank information. "Mrs. Martinez, could you..." "I'll stay here with the girls," she began, but was immediately met with protests from both Sophie and Sarah. "No," they exclaimed in unison, then looked at each other in surprise at their synchronized response. "We're coming too," Sophie insisted, her chin set in a way that was so reminiscent of Elena that it made Alexander's heart ache. Sarah nodded, firmly. "Whatever's in that safety deposit box is about us. We have a right to be there." Alexander looked at Mrs. Martinez, who gave a slight shrug. "They're right, sir, and they're certainly their mother's daughters, both of them. Elena would have wanted them there." The drive to the bank was tense with anticipation. Alexander's driver navigated through the early evening traffic, while in the back seat, Sophie and Sarah sat on either side of him, their shoulders touching his arms. He noticed how they had unconsciously adopted the same posture, both with their hands clasped in their laps, both staring straight ahead. Mrs. Martinez sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at them in the rearview mirror. Alexander caught her eye once, and she gave him an encouraging nod. She had been Elena's confidant, he realized. All these years, she had carried this burden alone, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. As they pulled up to the bank, Alexander saw a woman in a suit standing by the front door. Maria Delgado, he presumed. The bank's lights were dimmed, and the parking lot was empty except for a few employee vehicles. "Remember," he said softly. "To the girls, whatever we find in that safety deposit box, we're in this together. All of us." They nodded solemnly, reaching for his hands as they walked toward the entrance. The setting sun cast long shadows across the bank's facade, and Alexander couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the threshold of a moment that would change their lives forever. Maria Delgado greeted them with a warm but professional smile, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the two identical girls. She led them through the quiet bank, their footsteps echoing in the empty space, toward the safety deposit box vault. As she input the security code and used her key, Alexander clutched Elena's key tightly in his hand. In moments, they would unlock whatever secrets his wife had discovered in her final months. He looked down at the girls beside him, one in her expensive dress, the other in borrowed clothes, both wearing identical expressions of nervous anticipation, and silently promised Elena that he would make things right no matter what they discovered. The safety deposit box vault was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as Maria Delgado guided them to box number 2847. She inserted her master key, gesturing for Alexander to use Elena's key simultaneously. The mechanism clicked softly, and the box slid out smoothly, carrying with it the weight of 10 years of secrets. "I'll give you privacy," Maria said softly, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she retreated to the vault's entrance. "Take as much time as you need, within reason." Alexander placed the metal box on the nearby table, aware of Sophie and Sarah pressing close on either side of him. Mrs. Martinez stood slightly behind them, her hands clasped tightly together. With careful movements, he lifted the lid, revealing a stack of documents, photographs, and a sealed envelope with his name on it, another letter from Eleanor. The first document he lifted out was a medical record dated 3 months before the girl's birth. Eleanor's elegant handwriting covered the margins with notes and questions. She had circled certain phrases multiple times: twin heartbeats detected and recommend additional monitoring. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, pointing to a grainy, ultrasound image paperclip to the corner. Unlike the partial image they'd seen in the photo earlier, this one clearly showed 2 distinct shapes. Alexander's hands trembled as he set aside the medical records and picked up a thin manila folder. Inside were what appeared to be private investigator reports, dated during Elena's final months. She had been looking into the hospital, specifically into a string of irregular adoptions that had taken place around the same time as the girl's birth. "Mum knew," Sophie said softly, her voice filled with wonder and sadness. "She knew there were two of us." Sarah remained silent, but her hand found Sophie's across the table, their fingers intertwining naturally. Alexander watched the gesture, his heart constricting at this simple evidence of their connection, a connection that should have existed for the past 10 years. The next document made his blood run cold. It was a letter from a nurse who had been present during the delivery, written to Elena just weeks before her passing. The nurse expressed her guilt over what had happened, describing how the hospital's then director, Dr. James Morrison, had orchestrated everything. "He said one of the babies was too weak to survive," Alexander read aloud, his voice tight with anger. "He told the staff to inform us that only one child had survived, while the other was secretly transferred to St. Mary's orphanage. The nurse writes that she couldn't live with the guilt anymore, but by the time she sent this letter, Elena was too weak to act on the information," Mrs. Martinez finished quietly. "She could barely lift her head in those final days." At the bottom of the box lay Elena's final letter, sealed in an envelope that bore small water stains. Her tears, Alexander realized. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the pages within. "My dearest Alexander, Sophie and..." He had to pause, collecting himself before continuing. "And Sarah, if you're reading this, then my suspicions were right, and you finally found each other. I fought so hard to stay, to see this moment, to make things right, but I feel my strength fading, and I know I won't be here to witness your reunion." The girls pressed closer as he continued reading. "Alexander, my love, I know you'll blame yourself for not seeing the signs, for not investigating sooner. Don't. The people involved went to great lengths to hide the truth. Instead, focus your energy on healing our family, on giving our daughters the chance to know each other, to be sisters as they were always meant to be." Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, leaving streaks in the light layer of dirt that still clung to her face from her life on the streets. Sophie immediately pulled a handkerchief from her dress pocket and handed it to her sister, the gesture so natural it seemed like they'd been doing it all their lives. "To my precious daughters," Alexander's voice cracked as he read on, "I held you both, if only for a moment, before they took you away from me. I memorized your faces, your tiny fingers, the way you reached for each other even then. Sophie, my bright morning star, and Sarah, my sweet evening light. Those are the names I whispered to you in those brief seconds we shared." Mrs. Martinez gasped softly. That's why she insisted on naming her Sophie. She wanted them to have the names she'd chosen together. "I don't know what circumstances you'll find each other in," Elena's letter continued, "but I know in my heart that you will find each other. The bond between twins is stronger than any force that might try to separate them. Sophie, Sarah, please forgive us for the years you've lost. Build new memories together. Take care of each other and take care of your father. He'll need both of you more than he knows." The letter went on to detail account numbers, trust funds that Elena had set up in both girls' names, and most importantly, the names of people who'd been involved in the separation. Dr. Morrison topped the list, followed by several nurses and administrators who had since left the hospital. "There's one more thing," Alexander said, reaching into the box and withdrawing. A small velvet pouch. Inside were two identical silver lockets, each engraved with one of the girls' names. When opened, they contained tiny photographs of Elena, smiling radiantly at the camera. "She never lost hope," Mrs. Martinez whispered, watching as Alexander helped each girl fasten their locket around their neck. "She made sure there would be proof, that there would be a way for you to find the truth." The gravity of Elena's final gift settled over them like a blanket. In the sterile vault of First National Bank, surrounded by the evidence of a decade-old deception, a family was beginning to heal. But Alexander knew this was just the beginning. There were still questions to be answered, people to be held accountable, and most importantly, a lifetime of lost moments to try to reclaim. The ride back to the Thompson mansion was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, casting long shadows through the car windows. Sarah sat with her head resting against the window, one hand absently touching the silver locket around her neck. Sophie mirrored her position on the other side, their reflection in the darkening glass creating an endless loop of identical faces. Alexander's mind raced with everything they'd discovered. The documents from the safety deposit box were secured in his briefcase, but Elena's words echoed in his thoughts. She had known, had fought to expose the truth even as her strength failed. Her? And now, 10 years later, her final gift to their family was the chance to make things right. As they pulled into the circular driveway of the mansion, Mrs. Martinez cleared her throat softly. "I've taken the liberty of calling Rosa to prepare a proper dinner. The girls need to eat, and we all have much to discuss." Alexander nodded gratefully. In the chaos of the day's events, he'd forgotten about basic necessities like food. Sarah's eyes widened at the mention of dinner, and he was painfully reminded that her life at St. Mary's had likely been one of constant want. "First," he said as they entered the house, "Sarah needs proper clothes. Sophie, would you help your sister find something comfortable to wear?" The word sister felt strange on his tongue, but the bright smiles that lit up both girls' faces told him it was right. Sophie immediately took Sarah's hand, leading her toward the grand staircase. "My room has 2 closets," she was saying excitedly, "and I have so many clothes I never wear. Oh, you can have my blue cashmere sweater. I always thought it was too big for me, but it would look perfect on you." "Sir," Mrs. Martinez said once the girls were out of earshot, "there are arrangements that need to be made, legal matters to consider." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling the weight of the day's events. "Yes, I'll call James first thing in the morning. As my lawyer, he needs to know everything we've discovered. We'll need to move quickly to establish Sarah's identity, to secure her place in the family legally." "And what about Dr. Morrison?" Mrs. Martinez asked, her voice hardening at the name. "The man responsible for all of this?" "He'll be dealt with," Alexander replied, a steel edge entering his voice. "Elena gathered enough evidence to destroy him. But first we need to focus on Sarah, on helping her adjust to this new life." From upstairs came the sound of girlish laughter, a duet of identical voices sharing some private joke. The sound brought an unexpected smile to Alexander's face, even as tears pricked at his eyes. How many moments like this had been stolen from them? "Mrs. Martinez," he said suddenly, "I owe you an apology. You carried this burden alone for so long." She held up a hand, stopping him. "No apologies needed, sir. I made a promise to Elena, and now I've fulfilled it. Seeing those girls together, hearing them laugh, that's all the reward I need." The sound of footsteps on the stairs drew their attention. Sarah and Sophie descended together. Sarah now dressed in a simple blue sweater and jeans that could have come from any high-end department store. She had washed her face, and her hair had been neatly brushed, making the resemblance between the girls even more striking. "Dad," Sophie called out, "Sarah's never had sushi. Can we order from Nobu, please?" Alexander felt a surge of emotion at the casual way Sophie had included her sister in such a normal request. "Of course. Mrs. Martinez, would you ask Rosa to set an extra place at the table? And perhaps we could eat in the family room tonight, make it more casual." The housekeeper nodded, understanding his intention to make Sarah feel more comfortable. As she headed toward the kitchen, Alexander turned to find both girls watching him with identical expressions of curiosity. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said, gesturing for them to follow him into his study. The room with its dark wood paneling and leather furniture had always been his sanctuary. Now, as the girls settled onto the leather sofa, it felt like it was becoming something more. A place for family discussions, for building new traditions. "Sarah," he began carefully, "I want you to know that this is your home now. We'll need to handle some legal matters, but you are my daughter and this is where you belong. However, I understand if you need time to adjust, to process everything that's happened today." Sarah's fingers went to the locket around her neck, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as a self-soothing mechanism. "What about St. Mary's?" "As Sister Catherine and the other girls, we'll visit them," Sophie interjected quickly. "They're part of your family too, right? So they're kind of like my family now as well." Alexander felt a surge of pride at his daughter's intuitive kindness. Sophie's right. We're not trying to erase your past, Sarah. We're just hoping to give you the future you should have had all along. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but before Alexander could move to comfort her, Sophie had already wrapped her arms around her sister. The gesture was so natural, so right, that it took his breath away. In just hours, they had begun to forge the bond that had been denied them for so long. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Martinez's return. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, she said, smiling at the scene before her. "And Rosa's making her special chocolate soufflé for dessert." "With vanilla ice cream?" both girls asked simultaneously, then burst into giggles at their synchronized response. "Of course," Mrs. Martinez replied, her eyes twinkling. "Some things, it seems, run in the family." As Alexander watched his daughters chatting excitedly about dessert, he felt a presence in the room that he hadn't experienced in years. Eleanor was here, he thought, in the way Sophie crinkled her nose when she laughed, in the thoughtful tilt of Sarah's head, in the perfect synchronicity of their movements. His wife had given them one final miracle, the chance to be whole again. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the blue guest room's windows, casting a gentle glow over Sarah as she sat on the window seat, still wearing Sophie's borrowed pajamas. She had barely slept, spending most of the night trying to convince herself that this wasn't all an elaborate dream. Her fingers traced the silver locket around her neck, the only tangible proof that yesterday had been real. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Sophie stood there, already dressed in her school uniform, her hair neatly braided. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Sarah smiled at her sister. The words still felt strange and wonderful in her mind. "Not really. Everything feels so surreal," Sophie finished for her, crossing the room to sit beside her on the window seat. "I kept waking up to make sure you were still here. I was afraid you might disappear." The honest admission made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. "I used to dream about having a family," she confessed. "At St. Mary's, I would make up stories about my parents, about why they left me there. I never imagined that you already had a family looking for you." Sophie reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Dad's been on the phone since dawn. I heard him talking to his lawyer about making everything official." A knock on the doorframe interrupted them. Mrs. Martinez stood there, carrying a tray laden with breakfast foods. "I thought you girls might like to eat up here this morning. Mr. Thompson is still handling some urgent matters in his study." The smell of fresh pastries and hot chocolate made Sarah's stomach rumble. At St. Mary's, breakfast had been a simple affair, usually just oatmeal or toast. The spread before her now looked like something from a magazine: croissants, fresh fruit, yogurt parfaits, and 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. "I wasn't sure what you like," Mrs. Martinez said kindly, setting the tray on a small table, "so I brought a variety." "Everything looks amazing," Sarah breathed, then added shyly, "At St. Mary's, Sister Catherine always said we should be grateful for whatever we received." A shadow crossed Mrs. Martinez's face. "Well, in this house you're allowed to have preferences, to want things, to be yourself." Sophie was already pulling Sarah toward the table. "You have to try the chocolate croissants. Rosa makes them, fresh every morning, and they're absolutely heavenly." As the girls settled in to eat, Mrs. Martinez busied herself laying out clothes on the freshly made bed, a selection from Sophie's wardrobe that had been carefully chosen to fit Sarah. Everything still had its tags on, being part of Sophie's yet unworn collection. "Mr. Thompson called the school," she informed them as she worked. "Sophie, you'll be staying home for a few days while we sort everything out. And Sarah, we have an appointment later today with Dr. Chen. She's the family physician. Just a routine checkup." Sarah paused mid-bite, anxiety flickering across her face. Sophie immediately sensed her sister's distress. "Dr. Chen is really nice," she assured her. "She always gives out strawberry-flavored lollipops after checkups, and she has a golden retriever named Einstein, who comes to the office with her." The mention of a dog brightened Sarah's expression. "Really? At St. Mary's there was this stray cat that would visit sometimes. We named her Princess, and Sister Catherine let us feed her leftovers." We have space for pets here, Sophie said, excitedly. Dad always said I could have one when I was ready for the responsibility, but I could never decide what kind. Maybe we could choose together. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices from downstairs. Alexander's deep tone carried through the house, though his words were indistinct. Mrs. Martinez quickly moved to close the bedroom door, but not before they heard him say firmly, "No comment to the press. That's final." The girls exchanged worried glances. "The press?" Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively going to her locket again. Mrs. Martinez sighed, turning to face them. "Your father is a well-known figure, girls. News of Sarah's existence was bound to attract attention. But don't worry, Mr. Thompson has experience handling the media. He'll make sure you're both protected." Sophie nodded confidently. "Dad's really good at handling reporters. He never lets them bother me at school or take my picture without permission." "But what if they want to know about St. Mary's?" Sarah asked quietly. "About how I lived before?" "Then we'll handle it together," came Alexander's voice from the doorway. He looked tired but determined, his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled from what had clearly been a long morning of calls. "Your story is yours to tell, Sarah, if and when you choose to tell it." He crossed the room to join them, accepting. The cup of coffee Mrs. Martinez quickly poured from the carafe on the breakfast tray. "I've spoken with James, my lawyer. He's already working on the legal documentation we'll need, and I've arranged for additional security for the house and for when you girls eventually return to school." Will I go to Sophie's school?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Alexander sat down in a nearby armchair, his expression softening. "Would you like to? It's a wonderful school, and they have an excellent program to help new students adjust. But if you'd prefer something else, we can look at other options." Sarah glanced at Sophie, who was watching her with barely contained hope. The idea of being separated from her newly found sister, even for school hours, made her chest tight. "I want to stay with Sophie," she said firmly. Alexander smiled, and for a moment Sarah saw tears in his eyes. "Then that's what we'll do. But first, we need to handle the immediate concerns. Dr. Chen will be here at 11, and later today, we'll need to visit St. Mary's to discuss the transition with Sister Catherine." The mention of Sister Catherine made Sarah sit up straighter. The nun had been the closest thing to a mother she'd had for the past 10 years. "Will she be angry?" she asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Alexander assured her quickly. "I spoke with her this morning. She's overjoyed that you've found your family. She just wants what's best for you." Sophie suddenly jumped up, her face bright with inspiration. "Dad, can we take Sister Catherine some of Rosa's chocolate croissants, and maybe we could set up regular visits? Sarah shouldn't have to say goodbye to everyone at St. Mary's just because she's coming home." The word home hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. Home. She had a home now, a real one, with a family who wanted her. St. Mary's orphanage looked smaller, somehow, Sarah thought, as the Thompsons' car pulled up to the familiar iron gates. The building that had been her entire world for 10 years now seemed diminished in the shadow of her new reality. Sister Catherine stood waiting on the front steps, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile as Sarah stepped out of the car. "My dear child," the nun said softly, opening her arms. Sarah ran to her, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap and starched fabric. "Or should I say, Miss Thompson now?" "I'll always be your Sarah too," she whispered, clinging tightly to the woman who had been her guardian for so long. When she pulled back, she saw tears in Sister Catherine's eyes. Sophie approached cautiously, holding a large basket covered with a checkered cloth. "We brought treats from our kitchen," she said shyly. "Sarah said you liked chocolate croissants." Sister Catherine looked between the two girls, marvel evident on her face. "In all my years here, I knew there was something special about you, Sarah. The way you would stare at family photographs, saying you felt like you belonged somewhere else. God works in mysterious ways, bringing you back to your family." Alexander stepped forward, extending his hand. "Sister Catherine, I can't thank you enough for taking care of Sarah all these years. I want you to know that you'll always be welcome in our home. Inside the orphanage, News of Sarah's arrival had spread quickly. Children pressed their faces against windows and peeked around corners, whispering excitedly. In the main office, Sister Catherine served tea while Alexander's lawyer, James Wilson, explained the legal proceedings that would follow. Given the evidence Mrs. Thompson collected, establishing Sarah's identity will be straightforward, James explained, spreading documents across Sister Catherine's worn desk. The DNA test results from Dr. Chen's visit this morning are just a formality. The real challenge will be handling the press. They've been calling all morning, Sister Catherine confirmed, frowning, trying to get information about Sarah's time here. We've prepared a statement, Alexander said firmly. A simple acknowledgement of a private family matter, requesting respect for the girl's privacy during this transition period. Anyone who presses beyond that will have to deal with my legal team. Outside the office, Sarah and Sophie sat on the worn wooden bench where Sarah had spent countless hours reading. A few of the younger children had overcome their shyness and gathered around, fascinated by the identical girls in their matching outfits. "Will you still visit us?" 6-year-old Lucy asked Sarah, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Of course, I will," Sarah assured her, pulling the little girl into a hug. "And maybe sometimes you can all come visit me too. We have a huge garden perfect for playing games. And a tree house," Sophie added enthusiastically. "Dad built it when I was 7, but I never really used it much. It would be more fun with friends." The door to Sister Catherine's office opened, and Alexander emerged with James and the nun. "Girls, it's time to gather Sarah's belongings. Sister Catherine has given permission for Sophie to help you pack." Sarah led the way to the dormitory she had shared with 5 other girls. Her bed, now stripped of its sheets, stood in the corner by the window. Underneath was a single cardboard box containing all her worldly possessions, a few worn books, some hand-me-down clothes, and a small collection of treasures she'd gathered over the years. "Is this everything?" Sophie asked softly, looking at the meager collection. Sarah nodded, picking up a small stone painted to look like a ladybug. "Lucy made this for my last birthday. And this," she held up a frayed friendship bracelet, "was from Maria before she was adopted last year. We'll make a special place for them in your new room," Sophie promised. "Every treasure has a story, Dad always says. These are part of your story." As they packed, other girls filtered into the dormitory to say goodbye. There were tears and hugs, promises to write and visit. Sister Catherine appeared with a photo album she had kept of Sarah's time at St. Mary's. "For your new family," she said, handing it to Alexander, "so they can see the wonderful girl we've had the privilege of knowing these past 10 years. In the car ride home, Sarah sat quietly, the photo album open on her lap. Sophie leaned against her, looking at pictures of a younger Sarah at various orphanage events, Christmas pageants, summer picnics, award ceremonies from school. "You won the spelling bee 3 years in a row," Sophie asked, pointing to one photo. Sarah nodded. "Sister Catherine helped me practice. She said education was the key to a better future." "She was right," Alexander said from the front seat, catching their eyes in the rearview mirror. "And now you'll have every educational opportunity available. Both of you will." As they pulled into the mansion's driveway, Sarah noticed additional security personnel stationed at the gates. A few photographers had gathered across the street, but the car's tinted windows and the vigilant security team kept them at a safe distance. "Home sweet home," Sophie announced as they entered the house. "Now we can finally start making your room exactly how you want it. Dad says we can redecorate everything." Mrs. Martinez met them in the foyer, her face concerned. "Mr. Thompson, there's something you need to see." She handed him a tablet displaying a news website. Alexander's expression darkened as he read. "What is it, Dad?" Sophie asked, but Sarah had already glimpsed the headline over his shoulder. "Hospital director denies allegations of separated twins, claims Thompson family situation a misunderstanding." Alexander quickly handed the tablet back to Mrs. Martinez. "Nothing for you girls to worry about. Why don't you go up and start planning Sarah's room? I believe Rosa mentioned something about fresh cookies in the kitchen too." As the girls headed upstairs, Sarah couldn't help but overhear Alexander's quiet words to Mrs. Martinez. "Get James back here. If Morrison wants to play this game, He's about to learn what happens when you mess with my family." Sophie squeezed her hand, drawing her attention back. "Come on," she said brightly. "I have some interior design magazines we can look through. What's your favorite color?" Sarah smiled, pushing away her worries about headlines and hospital directors. "Blue," she said firmly, "like our room at St. Mary's. Sister Catherine always said it was the color of hope." The following morning, Alexander sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of documents and multiple screens displaying news coverage of the situation. James Wilson paced the room, phone pressed to his ear, while Mrs. Martinez served fresh coffee and occasionally glanced worriedly at the security feeds showing the growing media presence outside the gates. "This is unacceptable," James said firmly, into his phone. "Dr. Morrison's statement isn't just misleading, it's a direct attempt to discredit our evidence." He paused, listening. "No, we're not interested in a private meeting. Any discussions will take place with all parties' legal representatives present." Alexander rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The morning papers had run Dr. Morrison's statement as their leading story, casting doubt on Elena's evidence and suggesting that Sarah's resemblance to Sophie was merely a remarkable coincidence. Some outlets had even hinted that Alexander might be the victim of an elaborate scam. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sophie and Sarah stood in the doorway, still in their pajamas, their matching faces concerned. "Dad," Sophie ventured, "we saw the news on my tablet." "Girls, you shouldn't be worrying about this," Alexander began, but Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised in a gesture that reminded him startlingly of Eleanor. "It's our story too," she said quietly but firmly. "We deserve to know what's happening." James ended his call and exchanged glances with Alexander, who nodded slowly. "You're right," he acknowledged, gesturing for the girls to come in. They settled on the leather sofa, shoulders touching, as Mrs. Martinez discreetly closed the door. "Dr. Morrison is trying to protect himself," Alexander explained carefully. "He's afraid of what might happen if people discover he was involved in separating you two. But we have your mother's evidence, and now we have the DNA results from Dr. Chen confirming you're identical twins." "So why doesn't he just admit what he did?" Sophie asked, frowning. "Because it's not just about you two anymore," James interjected gently. "If Dr. Morrison admits to being involved in your separation, it could lead to investigations into other possible cases. His entire career, his reputation, everything would be at risk." Sarah's hand went to her locket, a gesture that Alexander was beginning to recognize as her way of finding courage. Are there other children like me, other families that were separated?" The question hung heavy in the air. It was something Alexander had been wondering himself since discovering Elena's research. The private investigators' reports had hinted at other irregular adoptions during Morrison's tenure as hospital director. "We don't know," he answered honestly. "But if there are, we'll find them. That's a promise." A knock at the door announced Rosa carrying a breakfast tray. "The girls haven't eaten yet," she explained, setting out plates of French toast and fresh fruit. "And growing children need their breakfast, no matter what's happening in the news." The normalcy of the moment, sharing breakfast in his office while discussing such extraordinary circumstances, struck Alexander as surreal. Yet watching his daughters eat together, finishing each other's sentences, and sharing knowing looks, he felt a profound sense of rightness beneath all the chaos. "Dad?" Sophie said suddenly. "I have an idea. What if we told our story first before Dr. Morrison and the newspapers make up their own version?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "We could talk about how we found each other, show people Mum's evidence. Maybe if everyone knows the truth, other families will come forward too." James straightened in his chair. "It's not a bad idea, actually. Controlling the narrative would give us a significant advantage. We could do an exclusive interview with a respected journalist, someone who would handle the story with appropriate sensitivity." Alexander looked at his daughters, seeing the determination in their identical faces. They were so young to be dealing with such complex situations, yet they were showing remarkable strength and wisdom. Elena would have been proud. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it as a family. No separate interviews, no sensational headlines, just the truth told in our own words." Mrs. Martinez, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I know someone who might be perfect. Catherine Bennett from the Sunday Chronicle. She's known for her investigative work in family justice cases, and she has a reputation for being thorough but compassionate. I remember her, Alexander nodded. She did that series on adoption reform last year, but girls, are you sure you're ready for this? Once we go public with the full story, there's no going back. The twins exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications they seemed to have mastered in their short time together. We're sure, they said in unison. James was already pulling out his phone. I'll have my team draft a formal statement and reach out to Ms. Bennett. We'll need to move quickly before Morrison can spin this any further. And I'll have Rosa prepare something special for dinner, Mrs. Martinez added. The girls will need their strength for what's coming. As the adults began making arrangements, Sarah and Sophie remained on the sofa, their breakfast forgotten. Sarah leaned her head on her sister's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the past few days. Are you scared? She whispered. Sophie squeezed her hand. A little. But we have each other now. And we have Dad, and Mrs. Martinez, and everyone else who loves us. We are stronger together. Looking at them, Alexander felt a fierce surge of protective love. They were right, this was their story to tell. And he would make sure they had every support, every protection, every advantage in telling it. Morrison and his allies were about to learn that the Thompson family was not to be underestimated. Catherine Bennett sat in the Thompson mansion's sunlit conservatory, her recorder placed carefully on the table between them. She had arrived early that morning, taking in the enhanced security presence and the small group of photographers still camped outside the gates. But here in this peaceful space, surrounded by Elena Thompson's carefully tended orchids, the outside world seemed distant. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Alexander said, his daughters seated on either side of him on the antique sofa. We appreciate your reputation for handling sensitive stories with discretion. Catherine nodded, her experienced eyes taking in the scene before her. The girls were dressed similarly, but not identically. Sophie in a pale blue dress, Sarah in cream-colored slacks and a matching blouse. Their hands were clasped together, drawing strength from each other. Before we begin, Catherine said gently, I want you all to understand that we can stop at any time. This is your story to tell, and we'll tell it on your terms. Mrs. Martinez served tea and freshly baked cookies, hovering protectively nearby as the interview began. Catherine started with the basics, the chance encounter in the park, the immediate recognition of their similarities, the discovery of Elena's hidden evidence. Sarah, Catherine asked carefully, can you tell me about the moment you first saw Sophie in the newspaper? Sarah's fingers went to her locket, but her voice was steady. It was during last year's technology conference. Dad, Mr. Thompson then, was on the cover of the Business Weekly, and Sophie was in one of the photos with him. I kept the magazine hidden under my mattress at St. Mary's. Sometimes at night I'd look at it and wonder why someone who looked so much like me lived such a different life. Sophie squeezed her sister's hand. And I always felt like something was missing, she added. Dad used to find me looking through Mum's old photos for hours, like I was searching for something I couldn't name. Catherine turned to Alexander. When did you first begin to suspect that Elena's concerns might have merit? The moment I saw Sarah's birthmark, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Identical placement, identical shape. But it was Elena's letter that confirmed everything. She knew, somehow she knew what had happened. She spent her final months gathering evidence, preparing for the day when the truth would come out. The interview continued, moving through the events of the past week. Catherine listened intently as they described the discoveries in the safety deposit box, the DNA confirmation, and Dr. Morrison's attempts to discredit their story. Mrs. Martinez, Catherine called to the housekeeper, who had remained nearby, would you be willing to share your perspective? You were present at the hospital that day. Mrs. Martinez stepped forward, smoothing her apron nervously. I saw 2 babies, she said firmly. I've carried that knowledge for 10 years, wondering if I should have spoken up sooner. Elena knew something was wrong. She could feel it. But by the time she had proof, she was too weak to fight anymore. Catherine's questions were thorough but gentle, allowing each person to tell their part of the story in their own way. When she asked about Dr. Morrison's recent statements, Alexander's expression hardened. "He's trying to protect himself at the expense of my daughters," he said. "But Elena left us irrefutable evidence. The DNA tests confirm what we already knew in our hearts." Sarah and Sophie are twins, separated at birth through his actions. "And what do you hope will come from sharing your story?" Catherine asked, directing the question to the girls. The twins exchanged glances before Sarah spoke. "We want other families to know the truth. Maybe there are more children out there like me wondering why they feel incomplete. They deserve to find their families too." Sophie nodded. "And we want to finish what Mom started. She fought so hard to expose the truth. We need to be brave like she was." As the interview drew to a close, Catherine turned off her recorder and sat back, visibly moved by what she had heard. "This is more than just a story about separated twins," she said thoughtfully. "It's about a mother's love reaching beyond her time, about sisters finding each other against impossible odds, about truth prevailing over deception." "When will the article be published?" Alexander asked, his arm protectively around both girls. "Sunday's edition," Catherine replied. "I'll send you a draft to review first, of course. And I promise you, this story will be told with all the dignity and respect it deserves." After Catherine left, the family remained in the conservatory. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the orchids, creating patterns on the tiled floor. Mrs. Martinez brought fresh tea and sat with them, all of them processing the emotional weight of sharing their story. "Do you think it will make a difference?" Sarah asked quietly. Telling everyone what happened, Alexander pulled both girls closer. "Your mother believed that the truth always finds its way into the light. She trusted that when it did, it would help not just our family but others too. And she was right. She's still right." Sophie rested her head on his shoulder. "I wish she could see us now, all of us together." "She can," Mrs. Martinez said softly, looking at the orchids Elena had so lovingly tended. "Mothers always find a way to watch over their children." As if in response to her words, a gentle breeze stirred the flowers, carrying with it the faintest scent of Elena's favorite perfume. The twins smiled at each other, their free hands touching their lockets in perfect synchronization. The story would break on Sunday, and with it would come new challenges, new scrutiny, new battles to face. But in that moment, surrounded by Elena's flowers and wrapped in the love of their growing family, they were ready for whatever came next. Sunday morning arrived with an unusual stillness over the Thompson mansion. Alexander sat in his study, the advance copy of the Sunday Chronicle spread before him on his desk. Catherine Bennett's article occupied the entire front page, accompanied by a carefully chosen photograph of the twins sitting in the conservatory, surrounded by Elena's orchids. The headline read, "A Mother's Final Gift, the Untold Story of the Ilme." Thompson twins. The article was everything they had hoped for, compassionate, thorough, and undeniably powerful. Catherine had woven together Elena's evidence, the hospital records, and the family's personal narrative into a compelling exposé that left no room for doubt about the truth of their story. "Sir." Mrs. Martinez appeared at the door, her face tense. "You might want to see this." She handed him her tablet open to a breaking news alert. Dr. Morrison had called an emergency press conference at the hospital. The live stream showed him standing at a podium, his usual confidence notably absent as he faced a barrage of questions from reporters. "I need to wake the girls," Alexander said, rising from his desk. "They should hear whatever he has to say." But when he reached the hallway between their rooms, he found both doors open. Sophie and Sarah were already awake, huddled together on Sarah's window seat with Sophie's tablet between them, watching the same live stream. "Dad," Sophie called out softly, making room for him to join them. "He looks scared." On the screen, Dr. Morrison cleared his throat, his hands visibly shaking as he adjusted his microphone. "In light of recent revelations and after careful consideration, I feel compelled to address the allegations made in today's Sunday Chronicle." Sarah leaned closer to the screen, her hand automatically finding her sister's. They watched as the man responsible for their separation began to crack under the pressure of truth. "While I maintain that all actions taken at this hospital were intended to be in the best interests of our patients," Morrison continued, his voice strained. I acknowledge that serious errors in judgment may have occurred during my tenure as director. May have occurred, Alexander muttered, but the girls shushed him, intent on hearing more. The case of the Thompson twins has brought to light certain irregularities in our past procedures. I am announcing my immediate resignation as hospital director and my full cooperation with any investigations into these matters. The press room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions as Morrison visibly wilted under the onslaught. But one voice cut through the noise, clear and determined. Dr. Morrison, are there other cases, other families who were separated? The former director's face went pale. Before his aide could usher him away from the podium, he uttered 7 words that would change everything. There may have been similar situations. Yes. Mrs. Martinez appeared in the doorway, holding a cordless phone. Mr. Thompson, James, is on the line. He says the hospital's board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. They want you to attend. Alexander looked at his daughters, seeing the mixture of emotions playing across their identical faces. Girls, I need to handle this. Mrs. Martinez will stay with you and I'll have extra security. We want to come, they said in unison. This isn't just about us anymore, Sarah added quietly. Sophie nodded. If there are other families like ours, they need to know they're not alone. Mum would want us to help them. Alexander felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. His daughters were showing remarkable strength and maturity, but they were still so young to be dealing with such heavy issues. Let me talk to James first, he compromised. We'll figure out the best way to handle this. Sister Margaret greeted them at the entrance, her kind face showing signs of both hope and worry. Thank you for coming, she said warmly. Emma and Mrs. Chen are waiting in my office. I should warn you, Emma's gotten quite excited about the possibility of answers, despite our attempts to manage her expectations. Inside the office, they found a scene that struck them all with its familiar elements. A girl about their age sat next to a tired-looking woman, both of them clutching hands just as Sarah and Sophie often did. Emma looked up as they entered, and her eyes immediately locked onto the twins. Oh my God, she whispered, her free hand flying to her mouth. Mrs. Chen looked confused until Sister Margaret gently explained, these are the Thompson twins. Their case was the one that opened the investigation into the hospital's practices. We read about you, Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. Your story. It gave me hope that maybe I wasn't imagining things all these years. Sarah and Sophie moved closer, sitting down nearby while Alexander and James began discussing the technical aspects with Mrs. Chen and Sister Margaret. The 3 girls formed their own quiet bubble of conversation. You felt it too, didn't you? Sophie asked softly. That feeling that something was missing? Emma nodded vigorously. All my life. Mum said she could feel 2 heartbeats when she was pregnant, but the doctors insisted she was wrong. They said the medication they gave her during delivery must have confused her. The same medication they gave our mum, Sarah noted, exchanging significant glances with her sister. While the girls talked, the adults were reviewing records. James had brought copies of Elena's research, and Sister Margaret had pulled Emma's placement files. The parallels were becoming increasingly clear. The dates align perfectly, James was saying, laying out documents side by side. The same hospital, many of the same staff members involved, and the same pattern of dismissing the mother's concerns about multiple heartbeats. Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. There was a nurse, she said, her voice distant with memory. She tried to tell me something the day after the delivery, but then Dr. Morrison came in and sent her away. I never saw her again. The same thing happened with our mother, Alexander said gently. Elena documented similar experiences from other mothers in her research. Sister Margaret pulled out another file, her hands trembling slightly. There's something else you should see. A girl was brought to St. Vincent's home in Rhode Island on the same day Emma came to us. The paperwork. It's remarkably similar. A charged silence fell over the room. Emma's grip on her mother's hand tightened visibly. St. Vincent's? James asked, already pulling out his phone. We can have someone there within hours to begin checking records. I have the file here, Sister Margaret said, passing over a thick folder. We maintain connections with other homes in the region, sharing information when children might have siblings in different locations. It's standard practice, but in this case... Alexander watched as his daughters moved closer to Emma, offering silent support as the adults discussed the possibilities before them. The three girls sat together, united by their shared experience of feeling incomplete for so long. What happens now? Emma asked, her voice small but hopeful. Sophie reached for her hand. Now we investigate, just like Mom did for us. We follow every lead, check every record, until we find the truth. And we stay with you through all of it, Sarah added firmly. You're not alone anymore. Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes watching the interaction. All these years people told me I was being paranoid, that I needed to accept things as they were. But a mother knows. In her heart, a mother always knows. Alexander thought of Eleanor, of her unwavering certainty and determination. She had known that her discovery would lead to others, that her fight for truth would extend beyond their own family. Looking at his daughters now, offering comfort and hope to another family beginning their journey of discovery, he saw Elena's legacy living on in the most beautiful way possible. The conference room at the Elena Thompson Foundation's Boston office had been transformed into a command center. Maps, documents, and photographs covered the walls, while laptops displayed various database searches. In the center of this organized chaos, Sophie and Sarah sat with Emma, all three girls intently studying the records from St. Vincent's home. Look at this, Emma said, pointing to a document. The intake officer who processed my paperwork also signed these forms at St. Vincent's. Just like how the same social worker handled both our cases, Sarah noted, sharing a meaningful look with Sophie. Alexander watched from the doorway as the girls worked. They had developed an impressive system over the past few days, applying the investigative techniques they'd learned from Elena's notes to Emma's case. Their dedication was touching, but he worried they might be too emotionally invested. "Girls," he called softly, entering the room. "Rosa just delivered lunch. Why don't you take a break?" "But Dad," Sophie protested, "we're so close." "The girl, at St. Vincent's. Her name is Grace, and she was brought in on the exact same day as Emma. And look at her intake photo," Sarah added, holding up a grainy photograph. "She has the same distinctive birthmark as Emma, just like Sophie and I have matching marks." Alexander moved closer to examine the photograph. Indeed, there was a small crescent-shaped mark visible on Grace's shoulder, identical to the one he'd noticed on Emma during their meeting at St. Catherine's home. "James is already at St. Vincent's," he reminded them gently. "He'll verify everything in person. For now you need to eat and rest." Mrs. Martinez appeared with a tray of sandwiches and fresh fruit. "Your father's right. Even detectives need lunch breaks." The girls reluctantly stepped away from their work, but their conversation over lunch remained focused on the case. "Emma," Sarah asked carefully, "how are you feeling about all this, about possibly having a twin sister?" Emma played with her sandwich, her expression thoughtful. "It's overwhelming, but in a good way. All my life, I've had this feeling that something was missing. Watching you two together, seeing how you finish each other's thoughts and just understand each other without words, it makes me hope that maybe I could have that too." "You will," Sophie said confidently. "Once we find Grace." "If," Alexander interjected gently. "We need to be careful about making promises. There's still more investigation to be done." But even as he urged caution, his phone buzzed with a message from James. The lawyer had made significant progress at St. Vincent's, discovering more connections between the two cases. The same doctor who had handled Emma's birth had signed off on Grace's placement paperwork. The same unusual medications had been administered to both mothers during delivery. "Dad?" Sophie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Your phone kept buzzing. Is it news from Mr. Wilson?" Alexander looked at the eager faces before him, remembering how it felt when they were uncovering the truth about Sarah. "He's found some promising leads," he admitted, "but we need to verify everything before taking next steps." "Could we maybe look for a recent picture of Grace?" Emma asked hesitantly. Just to see? The girls turned to Alexander with pleading expressions that reminded him so much of Elena. It made his heart ache. How many times had she looked at him that same way, asking him to believe in seemingly impossible things? All right, he conceded, but let's be methodical about this. What would your mother's notes suggest as the next step? The twins exchanged excited glances before Sophie grabbed Elena's research notebook. Mom always said to follow the paper trail first, she recited. Look for patterns in dates, names, and locations. Sarah nodded, already pulling up a database. It's on her laptop, and cross-reference everything with hospital records from that period. Emma watched them work with a mixture of awe and hope. Your mum really thought of everything, didn't she? She knew the truth would come out eventually, Alexander said softly. She just wanted to make sure there was a clear path to follow. When it did. As the afternoon progressed, more pieces began falling into place. James sent regular updates from St. Vincent's, each one adding weight to their theory. Grace had been placed in the home under circumstances remarkably similar to Sarah's placement at St. Mary's. The same vague explanations, the same rushed paperwork, the same pattern of dismissed concerns. Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Martinez appeared, at the door. Mrs. Chen is here. She says she has something important to share. Rebecca Chen entered the conference room clutching an old shoebox. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. I've kept these all these years, she said, removing the lid to reveal a collection of hospital papers, photographs, and diary entries. After Emma was born, I started documenting everything, just like your wife did. I thought people would say I was crazy, so I kept it hidden. But when I read about your case, Emma moved to her mother's side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The gesture reminded Alexander of how Sophie and Sarah often comforted each other. I heard two distinct cries, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice thick with emotion, before they gave me the medication that made everything fuzzy. And later, when I tried to ask questions, Dr. Morrison said the same things he told your wife, that I was confused, that the medication had affected my memory. Alexander began carefully examining the documents from the box, his experienced eyes catching details that others might miss. The similarities to Elena's case were striking, not just in the medical records, but in the way both mothers had fought to preserve the truth they knew in their hearts. "Mum," Emma whispered, hugging her mother tighter, "why didn't you tell me about all this?" "I didn't want to burden you with what I couldn't prove," Mrs. Chen replied. "But when I saw the article about the Thompson twins, when I read about Eleanor's investigation, I knew it was time to bring these out of hiding." The girls had gathered around the box, carefully examining its contents with the reverence of archaeologists uncovering ancient treasures. Each document they found seemed to strengthen the connection between Emma and Grace's cases. "Dad," Sophie said suddenly, holding up a photograph. "Look at this." It was a delivery room photo, taken moments after Emma's birth. In the background, partially visible through a doorway, was a second bassinet being wheeled away by a nurse. The same nurse, who appeared in Elena's documentation of other cases. Alexander felt a familiar surge of emotion, the same feeling he'd experienced when they'd first discovered the truth about Sarah. History was repeating itself, but this time, they had the tools and knowledge to help another family find their way back together. The following morning brought news that would change everything. James arrived at the Foundation's office early, his expression a mixture of excitement and caution as he called everyone into the conference room. "I've just finished speaking with Sister Angela at St. Vincent's," he announced, spreading photographs across the table. "Grace has been living in Providence, Rhode Island, less than 2 hours from here. And there's more. She's been experiencing the same inexplicable feelings of connection that Emma described." Emma, who had been staying with the Thompsons during the investigation, leaned forward to examine the most recent photograph of Grace. The resemblance was undeniable. The same heart-shaped face, the same distinctive amber eyes that had caught everyone's attention in Emma's intake photos. "She looks just like me," Emma whispered, her fingers tracing the outline of Grace's face in the photograph. "Even the way she tilts her head when she smiles." "Grace has agreed to meet," James continued, watching Emma carefully. Sister Angela explained our investigation to her and her foster family. They're willing to come to Boston this afternoon. The room erupted in excited chatter, but Alexander noticed Sarah and Sophie exchange knowing looks. They understood better than anyone the complex emotions that came with such a meeting. "Emma," Sophie said gently, "would you like us to help you prepare? We remember how overwhelming our first meeting was." Emma nodded gratefully, her eyes never leaving Grace's photograph. What do I say to her? How do I explain that I've felt her absence my whole life without sounding crazy? "You don't have to explain that part," Sarah assured her. "If she's your twin, she'll understand without words. We did." Mrs. Martinez, ever practical, began organizing the details. "We should use the small conference room for the meeting. It's more intimate. And I'll have Rosa prepare a selection of snacks. Having something to focus on can help ease the tension." As the adults discussed logistics, the three girls retreated to their corner of the office. Sophie and Sarah shared their experience of first meeting, while Emma listened intently, occasionally touching the photograph as if to reassure herself that it was real. "The hardest part," Sophie explained, "was holding back all the questions we had. We wanted to know everything about each other right away." Sarah nodded in agreement. "But then we realized we had time. We didn't have to squeeze a lifetime into one meeting." "Did you feel it right away?" Emma asked. "The connection?" The twins shared another look before Sophie answered. "Yes, but it was overwhelming at first. Like suddenly having access to a part of yourself you didn't know was missing." The hours leading up to the meeting passed in a blur of preparation. Emma alternated between nervous excitement and quiet contemplation, while Mrs. Chen sat nearby, holding her daughter's hand and sharing meaningful glances with Alexander. They both understood the weight of this moment, the potential for healing and the risk of reopened wounds. Finally, James's phone buzzed with a message. "They're here," he announced softly. The Foundation's security team had arranged for Grace and her foster family to enter through a private entrance, avoiding the media that had begun gathering outside since news of another potential case had leaked. Emma stood as the conference room door opened, her mother's hand tight in hers. Sophie and Sarah moved closer, offering silent support on either side. The girl who entered could have been Emma's reflection. She had the same amber eyes, the same nervous habit of tucking hair behind her ear. For a moment, the two girls simply stared at each other, recognition and wonder playing across their identical faces. "Hi," Grace said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Grace." "Emma," came the equally soft reply. They moved toward each other slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force. When they were close enough to touch, both girls reached out simultaneously, their hands meeting in the middle. "How you have it too," Grace whispered, pushing up her sleeve to reveal the crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. Emma nodded, showing her matching mark. "I used to think I was the only one who felt like this, like I was somehow incomplete. Like there was an echo where something else should be," Grace finished, tears filling her eyes. Their foster parents and Mrs. Chen watched from opposite sides of the room as the girls began to talk, their words tumbling out faster and faster as they discovered shared traits, similar interests, parallel experiences. Alexander moved to stand beside Mrs. Chen, who was watching the scene with tears streaming down her face. "They found each other," she said softly. "After all these years, they finally found each other." Sophie and Sarah sat nearby, their own hands clasped together as they witnessed another pair of sisters beginning their journey of reconnection. They had helped make this moment possible, using their own experience and their mother's guidance to light the way for others. "Dad," Sophie said quietly, "do you think there are more families out there waiting to be reunited?" Alexander looked at his daughters, seeing Elena's determination shining in their eyes. "If there are, we'll find them. That's what your mother would have wanted." As they watched Emma and Grace continue to discover each other, their connection growing stronger with each passing moment, Alexander felt Elena's presence more strongly than ever. She had known that exposing the truth about their family would create ripples of hope for others. Now watching those ripples spread He understood that her legacy would reach far beyond anything they had initially imagined. The days following Emma and Grace's reunion brought a flood of new developments. The Elena Thompson Foundation's hotline was overwhelmed with calls from families who had seen the media coverage of their story. Each call seemed to reveal another piece of the puzzle that Elena had begun to assemble years ago. Alexander sat in his office, reviewing the latest batch of reports with James, while Sophie, Sarah, Emma, and Grace worked at their designated corner, now expanded to accommodate the 2 additional investigators in training. The girls had formed an immediate bond, united by their shared experiences and determination to help others. "Look at this pattern," Sophie said, spreading out a series of documents. "All these cases happened within a 5-year period, all at hospitals where Dr. Morrison had connections." Sarah nodded, adding another file to the growing collection. "And they all involved families with similar profiles, one parent with significant resources, and children who ended up in specific orphanages. Just like us," Grace added softly, exchanging glances with Emma. The two had barely left each other's side since their first meeting, making up for lost time with an intensity that reminded Alexander of Sophie and Sarah's early days together. Mrs. Martinez entered the office carrying a tray of afternoon snacks, pausing to observe the scene before her. "Eleanor would be so proud," she said quietly to Alexander, "not just of the girls, but of how her work has grown beyond anything we imagined." Indeed, the foundation had evolved rapidly. What started as a personal mission to help the Thompson family had become a beacon of hope for dozens of potentially affected families. The wall of their main office now featured a carefully mapped network of connections, each thread representing a possible case that needed investigation. "Mr. Thompson?" The intercom buzzed with his assistant's voice. "Catherine Bennett is here for your meeting." The journalist had become an invaluable ally in their investigation, using her resources and connections to help verify leads and bring attention to the growing number of cases. She entered the office with her characteristic energy, carrying a thick folder of new information. "You're going to want to see this," she said, spreading photographs across Alexander's desk. These came from a former nurse who worked with Morrison at 3 different hospitals. She's been keeping records of everything she witnessed, waiting for the right moment to come forward. The photographs showed delivery rooms, nurseries, and hospital corridors from various facilities where Morrison had worked. In several images, the same faces appeared repeatedly, staff members who had moved with him from hospital to hospital. "It wasn't just one hospital," Catherine explained. "It was a network. Morrison and his team would rotate through different facilities, implementing the same practices wherever they went." Emma and Grace had moved closer to listen, their expressions serious. Like Sophie and Sarah, they had become deeply invested in understanding the full scope of what had happened to their family and others. "That's her," Emma said suddenly, pointing to a nurse in one of the photos. "She was there the day I was born. Mom recognized her in the delivery room photo we found." Alexander studied the image carefully. "James, we need to find this nurse. If she was part of Morrison's inner circle, she might have information about other cases." "Already on it," James replied, typing rapidly on his laptop. "Her name is Margaret Wheeler. She left the medical field shortly after Morrison's resignation and moved to Florida." "I want to help interview her," Sarah said firmly, Sophie nodding. In agreement beside her, Alexander started to protest, but Catherine interrupted gently. "Actually, that might not be a bad idea. These girls have a unique perspective on the situation. They know what questions to ask, because they've lived it." "We could go as a team," Sophie suggested. "Sarah and I have experience with these interviews now, and Emma and Grace could share their story too. It might help Mrs. Wheeler understand why this is so important." The adults exchanged glances, considering the proposal. The girls had proven themselves remarkably capable and insightful in their investigation work. "We'd need to be careful," James cautioned. "Margaret Wheeler might not be willing to talk, especially if she was deeply involved in Morrison's activities." "But she kept these records," Grace pointed out, gesturing to the photographs. "That must mean part of her wanted the truth to come out eventually." Mrs. Martinez, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Perhaps seeing these girls, living proof of what was done, might be exactly what she needs to finally tell her story." Alexander looked at the four girls, seeing in their faces the same determination that had driven Eleanor in her research. They had taken up her mission with a passion that went beyond simple curiosity or justice. For them, this was about healing, not just their own families, but potentially dozens of others who might be searching for their missing pieces. "We'll make arrangements," he decided. "But we do this carefully, professionally. No promises or accusations. We're just there to listen and learn." The girls broke into excited discussion, already planning their approach to the interview. Alexander watched them work, struck by how naturally they had fallen into their roles as investigators. Emma and Grace had brought new energy and perspective to the team, while Sophie and Sarah had become mentors of sorts, sharing what they had learned from their own journey. Catherine began organizing her notes, a slight smile playing on her lips. "You know," she said to Alexander, "when I first covered your family's story, I thought it was extraordinary. Now I realize it was just the beginning of something much bigger." "Elena knew," Alexander replied softly, watching the girls huddled together over their research. "Somehow, she knew that bringing our family's truth to light would help others find their way home too." The Florida sun beat down on the rental car as it wound through a quiet residential neighborhood in Tampa. Alexander glanced in the rearview mirror at the four girls in the back seat, all wearing matching Elena Thompson foundation polo shirts, their idea of presenting a professional image for the interview. "Remember," James reminded them from the passenger seat, "Mrs. Wheeler agreed to speak with us, but she's understandably nervous. We need to be patient and respectful." The house they pulled up to was modest, with well-tended flower beds and a small American flag by the door. Margaret Wheeler had agreed to meet them after weeks of careful communication through her lawyer, but the tension was palpable as they approached the front door. A woman in her 60s opened the door before they could knock. Her hair was silver, her face lined with age and worry, but her eyes were sharp as they took in the group before her, particularly the two sets of identical twins. "You must be the Thompson girls," she said softly, her gaze moving between Sophie and Sarah. "And you're Emma and Grace. I remember the day you were born." The admission hung in the air for a moment before Mrs. Wheeler stepped back, inviting them inside. The living room was neat and comfortable, with photographs covering the walls, mostly of landscapes and flowers, Alexander noticed, but no family pictures. "I've been following your foundation's work," Mrs. Wheeler said as they settled into seats. "When I saw the article about the Thompson twins, I knew it was only a matter of time before more cases came to light." "Is that why you kept records?" Sarah asked gently, pulling out her notebook, a habit she'd developed during their investigations. Mrs. Wheeler's hands twisted in her lap. "At first I told myself I was just being thorough, but deep down, I knew what we were doing was wrong. Dr. Morrison had a way of making it sound reasonable, placing babies with families who could provide better opportunities, protecting mothers from additional stress." "But they were separated from their families," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "From their sisters." "Yes," Mrs. Wheeler whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I tried to justify it. The wealthy families could provide everything a child needed. The others would be placed in good homes, given chances they might not have had otherwise. But watching you girls now, seeing how you found each other despite everything, I know we were wrong." Sophie leaned forward. "Mrs. Wheeler, we're not here to judge you. We just want to understand, to help other families who might be searching for each other." The former nurse nodded, rising to retrieve a large box from a nearby closet. "I kept everything," she explained, setting it on the coffee table. "Every case I witnessed, every transfer I was part of. I couldn't bring myself to destroy the records even after I left nursing." As they began going through the documents, a pattern emerged that confirmed their suspicions. Morrison had developed a systematic approach, identifying multiple births, where one parent had significant resources and the other was in a vulnerable position, whether through illness, financial difficulties, or other circumstances. He would arrange for complications during delivery, Mrs. Wheeler explained, her voice heavy with regret. The mothers would be sedated, told there had been problems. In the confusion, one baby would be transferred to a pre-selected facility. The paperwork would be modified, records altered. How many cases, James asked, taking careful notes, that I personally witnessed? At least 15 over the years I worked with him. But Morrison operated at multiple hospitals, had other teams. The total number could be much higher. Grace, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Why did you stay? If you knew it was wrong? Mrs. Wheeler's face crumpled slightly. Fear, at first. Morrison made it clear that our careers would be over if we spoke up. Then guilt. The weight of knowing became too heavy to bear. How could I come forward without admitting my own role? But watching your stories unfold in the media, seeing the healing that's possible, I knew it was time. Elena knew people would come forward, Alexander said softly. She believed that once the truth started emerging, others would find the courage to speak up. Mrs. Wheeler wiped her eyes. Your wife was remarkable, Mr. Thompson. She came closer to exposing the truth than anyone else had. When I heard about her passing, I almost came forward then, but fear held me back. I'm sorry. You're helping now, Sarah assured her. That's what matters. The girls worked methodically through the records, their experience from previous investigations evident in their organized approach. They identified patterns, cross-referenced dates and locations, and carefully documented everything that might help locate other separated families. There's something else you should know, Mrs. Wheeler said as the afternoon wore on. Morrison didn't work alone. There were board members, administrators at various hospitals who helped cover everything up. Some of them are still in positions of power. James straightened in his chair. We'll need names, dates, anything you can provide. These people need to be held accountable. And we need to protect the families who are just discovering the truth, Sophie added, showing wisdom beyond her years. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Wheeler stopped them at the door. I've carried this burden for so long, she said, looking at the four girls. Watching you together, seeing how you've turned your pain into purpose, it gives me hope that some good can come from all of this. Back in the car, the girls immediately began organizing their notes, their excitement about the new information tempered by the weight of what they had learned. Dad, Sophie said thoughtfully, we're going to need a bigger office and more help. Alexander smiled, reminded again of Elena's vision. I think you're right. This is becoming bigger than we imagined. But that's good, isn't it? Grace asked. The bigger it gets, the more families we can help. Exactly what Mom would have wanted, Sarah agreed, sharing a knowing look with her sister. As they drove back to their hotel, Alexander reflected on how far they had come from that chance encounter in the park. Elena's quest for truth had grown into something extraordinary, a movement led by the very children whose lives had been affected, working to ensure that other families would have the chance to be whole again. The Elena Thompson Foundation's headquarters buzzed with unprecedented activity. In the weeks following Margaret Wheeler's revelations, the organization had grown exponentially. New staff members occupied recently renovated offices, while volunteers managed the constantly ringing phones. At the heart of it all, the four girls maintained their special corner, now equipped with additional computers and a dedicated research space. Another match confirmed, Sophie announced, hanging up her phone with barely contained excitement. A family in Chicago just got their DNA results. They match with a girl in Seattle. Same birth date, same hospital, same circumstances. Sarah immediately began updating their digital database, which had become an intricate web of connections linking separated families across the country. That's the third confirmation this week, she noted, adding another pin to their interactive map. Emma and Grace, who had officially joined the Foundation's youth outreach program, were reviewing letters from other children in orphanages and foster homes who suspected they might have siblings. Listen to this one, Grace said, holding up a letter. This girl in Texas says she's always had dreams about a sister who looks just like her. She saw our story on the news and recognized the feeling we described, that constant sense that something was missing. Alexander watched from his office doorway, marveling at how naturally the girls had taken to their roles. They had become the heart of the Foundation, their personal experiences lending credibility and understanding to their interactions with other families. Mr. Thompson. His assistant appeared with a tablet displaying breaking news. The hospital. Board in Philadelphia just announced an internal investigation. They're specifically citing Mrs. Wheeler's testimony. The ripple effect of Margaret Wheeler's confession had been extraordinary. Other former hospital staff members had begun coming forward, each new testimony adding weight to their case. Morrison's network was unraveling rapidly, exposing decades of systematic deception. James burst into the office, his usually calm demeanor animated with urgency. "We've got something big," he announced, settling into a chair. "Remember those board members Mrs. Wheeler mentioned? One of them wants to talk." The girls immediately abandoned their tasks, gathering around to listen. They had earned their place in these discussions, their insights often proving invaluable. "Dr. Patricia Collins," James continued, pulling up a file on his laptop. "She was on the board at 3 different hospitals where Morrison worked. She says she has documentation that could help us identify dozens more cases." "Why is she coming forward now?" Sarah asked, her experience making her cautiously optimistic. "She says watching these families reunite changed her perspective, seeing the real impact of what they did." James paused, glancing at the 4 girls. "She says she can't stay silent anymore." Alexander studied the preliminary information James had brought. Dr. Collins had been young when she joined the first hospital board, eager to advance her career. Morrison had taken her under his wing, gradually involving her in his scheme. "She's taking a huge risk," Emma observed. "These revelations could end her career." "Sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrifice," Sophie said quietly, touching her locket, a gesture she and Sarah still shared in moments of significance. Grace nodded in agreement. "Like your mum. She knew exposing the truth might have consequences, but she did it anyway." Alexander felt a familiar ache in his chest at the mention of Eleanor. She would have been amazed to see how her initial investigation had grown into this movement for truth and justice. "We should meet with her," Sarah suggested. "All of us. Show her that coming forward can lead to healing, not just consequences." The others quickly agreed. They had learned that their presence, living proof of families reunited, often helped encourage hesitant witnesses to share their stories. Mrs. Martinez, who had been quietly organizing files nearby, spoke up. "I'll prepare the conference room. Dr. Collins might feel more comfortable in a less formal setting." As preparations for the meeting began, Catherine Bennett arrived for her weekly update. The journalist had become a trusted ally, helping to manage media coverage of their growing investigation. "The public response has been overwhelming," she reported, showing them the latest analytics. "Your story has inspired people across the country to question similar adoption irregularities. Support groups are forming in multiple cities." "Mum would have loved that," Sophie said, smiling at Sarah. "She always said the truth has a way of creating communities." Alexander watched as the girls returned to their work, each focused on their specific tasks, but moving in synchronized harmony. Emma and Grace had adapted seamlessly to the Foundation's mission, their own experience adding another layer of understanding to their investigations. "You know," Catherine observed quietly, "when I first wrote about your family's story, I thought it was extraordinary. But what's happening now, this movement you've created, it's revolutionary. You're not just reuniting families, you're changing the way people think about truth, justice, and the power of never giving up." Alexander nodded, his eyes on the wall of photos that had grown to include dozens of reunited families. Each image told a story of loss, discovery, and healing. Each smile represented another piece of Elena's legacy. "The girls are the real revolution," he said softly. "They've taken their own pain and transformed it into purpose. They're finishing what Elena started, but they're doing it in their own way." As if to prove his point, the 4 girls were already deep in discussion about Dr. Collins's upcoming visit, planning questions and preparing documents. They had developed an intuitive understanding of how to approach these sensitive conversations, combining their natural empathy with the investigative skills they'd learned from Elena's notes. The Foundation had become more than just a vehicle for investigation. It was a beacon of hope for families who had spent years feeling incomplete. And at its heart were 4 extraordinary girls who refused to let fear or convention stand in the way of uncovering the truth. Dr. Patricia Collins arrived at the Foundation on a rainy Tuesday morning, her professional demeanor barely masking her nervous energy. She paused in the lobby, taking in the wall of family photos, dozens of smiling faces telling stories of reunion and reconciliation. "Welcome, Dr. Collins," Sophie greeted her, professional despite her youth. "I'm Sophie Thompson, and this is my sister Sarah. And I'm Emma Chen," Emma added, stepping forward with Grace. "This is my sister Grace. We're the second case the Foundation helped solve." Dr. Collins looked between the two sets of twins, her composed facade cracking slightly. "I remember both your cases," she said softly. "I was on the board when the decisions were made." Alexander led them to the conference room, where Mrs. Martinez had arranged comfortable seating and refreshments. The setup was intentionally informal. They had learned that a relaxed environment often encouraged more open dialogue. "Before we begin," Sarah said, setting up her tablet to record the conversation, "we want you to know that we're not here to judge. We're here to understand and to help other families find their way back to each other." Dr. Collins nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I was young when I joined the board," she began. "Morrison was respected, influential. He presented everything so logically, helping families who could provide better opportunities, ensuring children would have the best possible lives." "But you knew it was wrong," Grace said gently. "Didn't you?" "Yes, Dr. Collins whispered. "I remember the first case I witnessed. A young mother, unmarried, with no financial resources. The father was from a wealthy family, but they weren't involved. Morrison said we were doing what was best for everyone." As she spoke, Sophie and Sarah exchanged glances. They had heard similar justifications from other witnesses, but each new testimony helped them understand the complex web of rationalization that had allowed the separations to continue for so long. "What made you decide to come forward now?" Emma asked, her notebook ready. Dr. Collins looked at the four girls, her eyes filling with tears. "Watching you, seeing how these separations affected real people, real families. I've spent years telling myself we did the right thing, but looking at you now, how can separating sisters ever be the right thing?" Alexander leaned forward. "Dr. Collins, we understand coming forward isn't easy, but your testimony could help us identify other families, prevent this from happening again." She nodded, reaching into her briefcase. "I brought everything," she said, placing a thick folder on the table. "Board meeting minutes, unofficial records. Morrison kept lists of facilities involved in the transfers. I've spent the past week gathering every document I could find." The girls immediately began organizing the documents, their practiced efficiency showing as they sorted through the materials. Each piece of paper could be another clue, another chance to reunite a family. "There's something else," Dr. Collins added hesitantly. "Something that's been weighing on me for years. Elena Thompson, your wife, your mother, she came to me once." The room fell silent. Alexander felt his heart skip a beat as Dr. Collins continued. "It was a few months before she passed away. She had suspicions, had gathered some evidence. She asked me directly if I knew anything about separated twins. I denied everything. The guilt of that moment has never left me." Sarah reached for Sophie's hand, both girls touching their lockets with their free hands. "Mom knew," Sophie said softly. "Even then, she was fighting for us." "She never gave up," Alexander agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And now through the Foundation, her work continues." Dr. Collins wiped away tears. "The Found Families wall in your lobby. How many cases have you solved?" 17 confirmed reunions so far, Emma reported proudly, with 12 more pending. DNA verification, and those are just the ones we know about. Each case helps us understand the pattern better, Grace added. Makes it easier to identify other potential matches. The former board member looked at the girls with a mixture of admiration and regret. "You've accomplished more in a few months than I managed in years of carrying this guilt. I should have spoken up sooner." "But you're speaking now," Sarah reminded her. "That's what matters." As they continued reviewing the documents, more patterns emerged. Dr. Collins's records provided crucial links between cases they had suspected were connected, but couldn't prove. Names, dates, and locations formed a clear picture of how Morrison's network had operated. "We'll need to approach this carefully," James advised, reviewing his notes. Some of these families may not be ready for the truth, and some of the people involved are still in positions of power. "We'll do what we've always done," Sophie said confidently. "Take it one family at a time, provide support through every step of the process. And protect those who come forward," Emma added, thinking of Margaret Wheeler and now Dr. Collins. Their courage helps others find their voice. Alexander watched as the girls continued their work, their natural ability to comfort and support extending to Dr. Collins. They had created something remarkable, a space where truth could emerge, without judgment, where healing could begin even in the midst of difficult revelations. "Eleanor would be proud," Mrs. Martinez said quietly, appearing at his side, "not just of what they've accomplished, but of who they've become." Indeed, looking at the four girls working together, Alexander saw something beyond the pain and loss that had initially brought them together. He saw strength, determination, and an unwavering commitment to helping others find their way home. The foundation had become more than just a mission to expose the truth. It had become a family in its own right, growing stronger with each new connection made, each new story uncovered. And at its heart were four extraordinary girls who had transformed their own experience of separation into a force for healing and hope. The autumn sun streamed through the foundation's windows, casting long shadows across the expanded office space. In the months since Dr. Collins's revelations, their work had grown exponentially. The original corner where the girls worked had evolved into a sophisticated command center, complete with multiple workstations and a dedicated research team. "Another DNA match confirmed," Emma announced, her voice carrying across the busy office. "The Martinez twins from Houston. That makes 23 reunited families now." Sarah looked up from her computer, where she was updating their database. "And look at this pattern. 3 more potential matches all connected to the same hospital in Denver. It's exactly like Mom predicted in her notes about Morrison's network." The foundation had developed a systematic approach to investigating cases, combining Elena's original research methods with new technologies and resources. Each success brought more attention, more leads and more families hoping to find their missing pieces. "Girls," Alexander called from his office doorway, "we have a situation that needs your expertise." They gathered in his office where James was already setting up a video conference. On the screen appeared Sister Catherine from St. Mary's, her familiar face creased with concern. "We have a young girl here," she explained. "Amanda Parker, age 11. She was brought to us as an infant under circumstances very similar to Sarah's case. Yesterday she saw a newspaper article about a family in California." "The Winters case," Sophie interrupted, already pulling up the file on her tablet. "We've been investigating them for weeks," Sister Catherine nodded. "Amanda says she recognizes herself in their daughter's photo. The birthmark, the unique eye color, everything matches." The girls exchanged knowing looks. They had become experts at recognizing the patterns, the small details that often connected separated siblings. "We'll need to proceed carefully," Alexander cautioned, but the girls were already in motion. "I'll contact the Winters family," Grace offered, reaching for her phone. "Emma and I can explain the process since we've been through it recently." "Sarah and I will review Mom's notes about that hospital during that time period," Sophie added. "There might be more connections we haven't discovered yet." Alexander watched with pride as they coordinated their efforts. What had started as 2 sisters finding each other had grown into something much larger, a movement led by young people who understood firsthand the importance of family connections. Mrs. Martinez appeared with fresh coffee and her ever-present notebook. "The media team is asking about doing a special report on our 6-month anniversary," she reported. "They're particularly interested in how the girls have become the face of the foundation." "Speaking of which," James interjected, "the hospital board in Denver is requesting a meeting. Dr. Collins's testimony has prompted them to launch their own internal investigation." The foundation's influence had grown far beyond their initial expectations. They weren't just reuniting families anymore. They were changing how institutions handled adoption records and medical documentation. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked her father quietly, gesturing at the bustling office beyond his door. "When you took me home that first day, did you think we'd end up here?" Alexander smiled, remembering the confused, hopeful girl who had appeared in the park that day. "Your mother imagined it," he replied. "She knew that finding the truth about our family would lead to something bigger." "The truth has a way of growing," Sophie quoted from Elena's notes, a phrase that had become something of a motto for their work. A commotion at the reception desk drew their attention. A woman had arrived unannounced, clutching a folder and looking nervous. The security team, well trained in handling unexpected visitors, had already moved to intercept her. "Wait," Emma called out, studying the woman's face. "She looks like one of the nurses from the photos Mrs. Wheeler gave us." The woman turned. They heard Emma's voice, her eyes widening as she took in the two sets of twins. "I worked with Dr. Morrison," she said, her voice trembling, "at 3 different hospitals. I've been following your work in the news, and I can't stay silent anymore." The girls immediately shifted into their well-practiced routine for handling new witnesses. Grace went to get water, while Sophie and Sarah guided the woman to their interview room. Emma retrieved their standard documentation forms, her movements synchronized with her sister's without need for words. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently, once they were settled. "Linda Martinez," the woman replied, no relation to their Mrs. Martinez. "I was a delivery nurse for 20 years. I saw things that have haunted me ever since." Alexander watched from the doorway as his daughters and their friends handled the interview with remarkable professionalism. They had developed an intuitive understanding of how to make witnesses feel comfortable, how to ask the right questions, how to piece together fragments of information into a coherent narrative. "We'll need to verify everything," James reminded them quietly. "Of course," Sophie agreed, "but look at these hospital records she brought. They match the timeline we already established from Dr. Collins's documents." The foundation had become a beacon of hope, not just for separated families, but for those who had carried the burden of silence for years. Each new witness who came forward helped them understand more about how Morrison's network had operated, and how they could prevent similar situations in the future. As the afternoon progressed, more details emerged from Linda's testimony. She had worked primarily in the nursery, witnessing countless separations, but feeling powerless to stop them. Like others before her, she had kept records, small notes, documents, photographs that might someday help reveal the truth. "I used to look at the babies," she confessed, tears rolling down her cheeks, "and wonder if they would ever find each other again, if they would feel that something was missing from their lives like you all did." Emma reached across the table to squeeze the woman's hand. "They will find each other," she said firmly. "That's why we're here. That's why your testimony is so important." The Elena Thompson Foundation's 6-month anniversary celebration was intentionally modest, a small gathering in the conservatory that had become the heart of their operations. The room was filled with orchids, Elena's favorite flowers now, tended by her daughters with the same care she had once shown. Among the guests were families they had helped reunite, each with their own story of loss and rediscovery. The Martinez twins from Houston sat with their parents, still marveling at their newfound connection. The Winters family had flown in from California, their daughter Amanda inseparable from her newly discovered sister. "I never thought this day would come," Sister Catherine said, watching the interactions with tears in her eyes. "When Sarah first came to St. Mary's, I sensed there was something special about her. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Alexander stood near the back of the room, observing the scene with quiet pride. Sophie and Sarah were showing a group of recently reunited siblings their research center, explaining how they used Elena's methods to track down connections. Emma and Grace led a support group for children still adjusting to their new family dynamics. "Your wife would be so proud," Mrs. Martinez said softly, appearing at his side. "Not just of what the foundation has accomplished, but of how the girls have grown into their roles." Indeed, the transformation had been remarkable. The shy, uncertain Sarah, who had first entered their lives, had become confident and purposeful. Sophie had discovered leadership abilities she never knew she possessed. Together with Emma and Grace, they had created something extraordinary, a place where broken families could find healing and hope. Catherine Bennett, working on a follow-up, piece about the foundation was interviewing Dr. Collins and other former hospital staff who had come forward. Their testimonies had been crucial in understanding the full scope of Morrison's network and in helping other institutions recognize and address similar issues. "Dad," Sophie called, waving him over to where she and Sarah stood with a newly arrived family. "This is the Richardson family. They found us through the website yesterday." The Richardsons looked nervous but hopeful, clutching a folder of documents much like the ones Elena had collected. Their story, as it emerged, followed the familiar pattern: a confused delivery, sedated mother, and years of unanswered questions. "We'll help you," Sarah assured them, her voice confident and compassionate. "We have a whole team now and a process that works. You're not alone anymore." The Foundation's approach had evolved significantly since their early days. They now offered comprehensive support, legal assistance, counseling, DNA testing, and, perhaps most importantly, a community of people who understood exactly what these families were going through. "Sometimes I wonder," Emma mused later as they cleared away the celebration decorations, "how many more families are out there? How many people don't even know they should be looking?" "That's why our outreach program is so important," Grace replied, referring to their newest initiative. "The more stories we share, the more people will recognize their own situations." The Foundation had recently launched a series of educational programs working with hospitals and adoption agencies to improve transparency and record-keeping. They were also developing resources for medical professionals who might encounter similar cases in the future. "Mom would have loved this part," Sophie said, carefully wrapping a leftover cake for Sister Catherine to take back to St. Mary's. "She always said that healing happens in communities, not in isolation." Sarah nodded, touching her locket, a gesture that had become less frequent but no less meaningful. "Remember what she wrote in her letter? About how the truth has a way of creating connections." "Speaking of connections," James interrupted, approaching with his tablet, "the Denver Hospital Board just confirmed our meeting for next week. They're interested in implementing our recommended protocols for multiple birth deliveries." Alexander watched as the girls immediately began planning their presentation, their enthusiasm unchanged despite the long day. They had become experts at sharing their story in ways that inspired institutional change while protecting the privacy of the families involved. Mrs. Martinez began turning off lights in the conservatory, leaving only the soft glow of decorative lanterns. The orchids cast delicate shadows on the walls, reminiscent of the day Elena had first planted them. "You know what makes this place special," she said thoughtfully. "It's not just about reuniting families. It's about creating a space where healing can happen naturally, where people can find their way back to each other in their own time." Alexander agreed, thinking of how their own family's journey had led to this moment. The Foundation had become more than just a mission to expose the truth. It was a living testament to Elena's belief in the power of love and persistence. As the evening wound down, the four girls gathered in their favorite corner, surrounded by the evidence of their work: maps showing connected cases, folders of ongoing investigations, and most importantly, the wall of smiling photographs showing families made whole again. "Sometimes I think about that day in the park," Sarah said softly. "How scared I was to speak up, to say what I believed to be true." "I'm glad you did," Sophie replied, hugging her sister. "Look at all the good that's come from that one moment of courage." Emma and Grace nodded in agreement, their own story of reunion now woven inextricably into the Foundation's larger narrative. Together they had created something beautiful from their experiences of loss and separation, a place where truth could emerge, where healing could begin, and where families could find their way home. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the Denver Medical Center's boardroom, where Alexander sat with Sophie and Sarah, preparing for their presentation. The girls had insisted on being part of this meeting, arguing that their personal experience would make the strongest case for institutional change. "Remember," James whispered as board members began filing in, "these people are allies now. Dr. Collins's testimony changed everything. Indeed, the atmosphere was different from their earlier confrontations with hospital administrators. Instead of defensive posturing, they were met with genuine interest and concern. Dr. Helen Rivera, the current board chair, had been particularly vocal about wanting to make amends for past wrongs. Before we begin, Dr. Rivera addressed the room, I want to thank the Elena Thompson Foundation for agreeing to help us implement new protocols. What happened under Morrison's leadership was a breach of trust that we're committed to rectifying. Sophie opened their presentation with the story that had started it all, her reunion with Sarah. The board members listened intently as she described the moment in the park, the discovery of Elena's research, and the growing network of families they had helped since then. Our mother knew that exposing the truth about our separation would lead to more discoveries, Sarah continued, her voice steady and confident. But she also believed in the power of institutions to change, to do better once they understood the impact of their actions. The presentation moved into the practical aspects of their proposed changes. The foundation had developed comprehensive guidelines for handling multiple births, ensuring transparency and maintaining detailed records. They had also created support systems for families who might face challenging circumstances during pregnancy and delivery. The key, Alexander explained, is creating an environment where ethical concerns can be raised without fear of retaliation. Many of our witnesses have told us they stayed silent because they felt powerless to challenge the system. Back at the Foundation's office, Emma and Grace were coordinating with their expanding network of support groups. The Foundation now offered regular meetings for reunited families, helping them navigate the complex emotions that came with rediscovering lost siblings. Another call from St. Vincent's, Grace announced, as Alexander, Sophie, and Sarah returned from Denver. They've identified 3 more cases that match Morrison's pattern. Sister Angela is already reviewing their records. The Foundation's work had created a ripple effect throughout the adoption and medical communities. Orphanages and hospitals across the country were re-examining their historical records, looking for patterns they might have missed before. We should organize a conference, Sophie suggested during their afternoon strategy meeting. Bring together all the institutions we've worked with, share best practices, create a unified approach to handling these cases. Mom would have loved that idea, Sarah agreed, already pulling up their contact database. She always said that lasting change happens through collaboration, not confrontation. Mrs. Martinez, who had been quietly observing from her desk, spoke up. Why not make it an annual event? The Elena Thompson Conference on Family Reunification and Ethical Healthcare Practices. The suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval. The Foundation had grown beyond its original mission of reuniting separated twins. It was now shaping policy, influencing institutional practices, and creating lasting change in the healthcare system. We'll need a bigger venue than the conservatory this time, Emma noted, thinking of their recent 6-month celebration. Maybe we could use the convention center downtown. Alexander watched as the girls began planning, their natural organizational abilities shining through. They had grown so much in these past months, taking on responsibilities that would have seemed impossible when they first started. Dad? Sophie called, noticing his thoughtful expression. What do you think about inviting some of the families? We've helped to speak at the conference. Let them share their stories directly. That's exactly what your mother would have suggested, he replied, smiling at how often Elena's influence appeared in their work. Personal stories have a way of making abstract issues real and immediate. As the day progressed, more developments unfolded. Catherine Bennett called with news that her latest article had prompted another former nurse to come forward with records from a hospital in Seattle. James received confirmation that 3 more DNA tests had come back positive, confirming suspected matches they had been investigating. It never stops amazing me, Grace said as they updated their wall of success stories, how each new case leads to another. It's like Mom's research was just the beginning of a much bigger story. That's because she understood something fundamental, Sarah replied, adjusting a photograph of recently reunited twins from Michigan. She knew that truth doesn't exist in isolation. Each revelation connects to others, creating a web of understanding that grows stronger with every new discovery. The Foundation's office hummed with activity as staff members coordinated various projects, support group meetings, investigation follow-ups, legal consultations. What had started in one corner of Alexander's corporate building now occupied an entire floor, with plans to expand further. "We're going to need more help soon," Emma observed, reviewing their growing caseload. "Maybe we could start an internship program, train other young people who want to help with family reunification work." The suggestion sparked an animated discussion about the foundation's future. They had already developed comprehensive training materials based on Elena's methods and their own experiences. Why not share that knowledge with others who felt called to this work? "Think about it," Sophie said excitedly. "We could create a whole network of investigators and support staff, all trained to handle these cases with the same care and attention, to detail that Mom used in her research." Alexander listened to their plans with pride and a touch of amazement. Eleanor's quest for truth had grown into something far beyond what any of them had imagined. Through their daughter's dedication and hard work, her legacy was touching lives across the country, creating positive change in ways that would continue long into the future. As autumn painted Central Park in shades of gold and crimson, Sophie and Sarah stood near the spot where they had first met. The bench where Alexander had sat that fateful day was now marked with a small plaque, a dedication to Elena Thompson and the foundation that bore her name. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Sarah mused, touching her locket. "I was so scared that day, but something inside me knew I had to speak up." "And now look at us," Sophie replied, gesturing to the small crowd gathering nearby. They had chosen this meaningful location for a special announcement, the official launch of the Elena Thompson Foundation's Youth Ambassador Program. Emma and Grace were already setting up the presentation materials, coordinating with the Foundation's media team. They had selected 20 young people from across the country to be the first cohort of ambassadors, each with their own connection to family separation and reunion. "Ready?" Alexander asked, approaching with Mrs. Martinez. They had both watched the girls grow into their leadership roles, becoming advocates and mentors for others facing similar journeys. The ceremony began with Sarah sharing their story, not just of finding each other, but of discovering their mother's legacy and building something meaningful from their experience. Sophie followed with an overview of the Foundation's accomplishments. 37 families reunited, 15 hospitals implementing new protocols, and countless lives touched by their work. "But today isn't about looking back," Emma announced, stepping forward. "It's about moving forward, about expanding our reach and helping more families find their way home." Grace introduced the youth ambassadors, each selected for their passion and commitment to the Foundation's mission. Some were reunited siblings themselves, while others had been inspired by the stories they'd witnessed through the Foundation's work. Elena Thompson believed in the power of truth to create positive change, one young ambassador said during her introduction. "Through this program, we're carrying that belief forward, reaching into new communities and helping more families discover their own hidden connections." The program would train ambassadors in investigation techniques, counseling support and advocacy work. They would learn to handle cases with the same care and attention to detail that had become the Foundation's hallmark. "Look at them," Mrs. Martinez whispered to Alexander as the young people gathered for photos. "Elena would be so proud of how her work has grown, how it's inspiring a new generation." Indeed, watching the enthusiastic group of ambassadors interact with his daughters, Alexander felt Elena's presence strongly. She had always believed that young people had a special capacity for empathy and understanding, especially in matters of family and identity. After the ceremony, the four girls led their new team on a tour of the park, sharing stories and building connections that would strengthen their work together. The autumn breeze carried the sound of their laughter, a reminder of how far they had come from the tension and uncertainty of their first meeting. "Dad!" Sophie called, waving him over to where the group had gathered by the pond. "We want to show them the ducks. It's kind of become our tradition with new team members." Alexander smiled, remembering how Sophie had been feeding these same ducks the day Sarah found them. Now, watching the ambassadors toss breadcrumbs and share their own stories, he saw how natural elements could help ease difficult conversations and build trust. "We should make this part of our regular training," Grace suggested. "Bringing new team members here, letting them feel the significance of where everything started." "It's like Mom always wrote in her notes," Sarah added. "The most important Breakthroughs often happen in unexpected places, when people feel comfortable enough to share their truth. As the afternoon progressed, more foundation members arrived, including some of the families they had helped reunite. The park became a gathering place for celebration and reflection, with small groups scattered across the grass, sharing experiences and offering support to those still early in their journey. "You've created something extraordinary," Catherine Bennett observed, having arrived to document the ambassador program's launch. "This isn't just about finding lost family members anymore. It's about creating a community where healing can happen naturally." The girls had insisted on ending the day with a special ceremony by Elena's plaque. Each ambassador placed a single orchid, Elena's favorite flower, near the bench, symbolizing their commitment to carrying forward her legacy of truth and healing. "Mum always said that flowers have a way of bringing people together," Sophie explained to the group. "They remind us that growth takes time, that beauty can emerge from difficult circumstances if we nurture it properly." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Alexander watched his daughters with the new ambassadors. They had taken their own experience of loss and transformation and turned it into a source of hope for others. Elena's work, begun in solitude as she fought to uncover the truth about their family, had blossomed into a movement that would continue touching lives for generations to come. "The truth really does have a way of growing," Sarah said softly, standing beside him, "just like Mom always believed it would." The park had quieted now, with only the gentle rustle of leaves and distant city sounds providing accompaniment to their reflections. This place, where their journey had begun with a chance encounter and a brave declaration of truth, had become sacred ground, a testament to the power of love, persistence, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The Elena Thompson Conference Center buzzed with activity as delegates from across the country gathered for the Foundation's first international symposium. What had started as a simple idea during their strategy meeting had grown into a major event, drawing participants from hospitals, adoption agencies, and family advocacy groups worldwide. Sophie and Sarah stood at the registration desk, greeting arrivals alongside Emma and Grace. The four girls had become the face of the Foundation, their story inspiring others to examine their own family histories and institutional practices. "Dr. Ramirez is here from Mexico City," Sophie announced, checking her tablet. "Her hospital network has identified several cases that match Morrison's pattern. They're requesting our help with the investigations." The Foundation's influence had begun spreading beyond American borders, as similar cases emerged in other countries. Eleanor's meticulous research methods were being adapted to help families across different cultures and legal systems. "The Australian delegation just arrived too," Grace added, directing them to the main conference hall. "They're particularly interested in our DNA database system." Alexander watched from the mezzanine level, pride swelling in his chest. The conference center, recently dedicated in Elena's name, was a testament to how far they had come. The modern building featured state-of-the-art research facilities, counseling rooms, and a permanent exhibition space documenting the Foundation's journey. "Mr. Thompson," one of their youth ambassadors approached with an urgent message. "The team in Seattle just confirmed another match. Twins separated at birth in 1989, one raised in Washington State, the other in British Columbia. Have Sophie and Sarah coordinate with our Canadian partners," he replied. Noting how naturally he had come to rely on his daughter's expertise, they've handled cross-border cases before. The morning's keynote session began with a powerful presentation. The Martinez twins from Houston, now active Foundation volunteers, shared their story of reunion and healing. Their parents spoke about the joy and challenges of rebuilding family bonds, while their youth ambassador discussed the support systems that had helped them through the process. "Every story matters," Sarah emphasized during her introduction of the next speaker. "Each family we help adds another piece to our understanding of how these separations happened and how we can prevent them in the future." Dr. Collins, who had become a valuable ally in their work, presented new research on the psychological impacts of family separation and reunion. Her data, collected from the Foundation's growing network of supported families, provided crucial insights for healthcare providers and counseling professionals. Between sessions, the girls gathered in what they still called their corner, though it had evolved into a sophisticated command center within the new building. The wall of success stories had grown so large, it now required its own dedicated space, with interactive displays allowing visitors to explore each family's journey. "Remember when this was just the four of us working from Dad's office?" Emma mused, watching volunteers coordinate with international partners via video conference. "Mom would never have imagined this," Sophie said, touching her locket. "Well, maybe she would have. She always saw possibilities that others missed." The afternoon sessions focused on practical applications of their work. Foundation teams demonstrated their investigation methods, sharing the updated versions of Elena's research protocols. Young ambassadors led workshops on family support and community building, while legal experts discussed the complexities of international family reunification. "We're receiving reports from the Singapore team," Grace announced during their afternoon briefing. "They've identified a pattern of separations in Southeast Asia that might be connected to Morrison's network. Multiple hospitals, same time. Period," Sarah noted, examining the data. "And look at this. Some of the administrative staff had connections to the hospitals we investigated here." Alexander joined their discussion, remembering how Eleanor had once theorized that the separation scheme might have international reach. Her notes had hinted at global connections, though she hadn't lived long enough to explore them fully. "Your mother would be amazed," Mrs. Martinez said, bringing them their usual afternoon tea, "not just by how far the foundation has come, but by how you girls have grown into your roles." Indeed, watching his daughters coordinate with international teams and mentor young ambassadors, Alexander saw Elena's influence in every aspect of their work. They had inherited her determination, her attention to detail, and most importantly, her compassion for families seeking answers. "Dad," Sophie called out suddenly, "the team in Vancouver needs our help with a delicate situation. They found a potential match, but one of the families is hesitant about coming forward." "We could go," Sarah suggested. "Emma and Grace handled things here when we went to Denver. And sometimes families need to see firsthand that reunion is possible." The suggestion sparked a familiar warmth in Alexander's chest. His daughters had developed an intuitive understanding of what separated families needed, not just practical help, but hope and reassurance from others who had walked the same path. As the day's sessions wound down, participants gathered in the central atrium where Eleanor's portrait hung above a peaceful water feature. The space had been designed to encourage reflection and conversation, with comfortable seating areas and walls lined with stories of reunion and healing. "It's amazing," one of the international delegates commented, "how one family's story could create such positive change in the world." Looking at his daughters among their growing network of supporters and allies, Alexander knew it was more than just their story. It was Elena's legacy of persistence and hope, transformed by their daughters into a global movement for truth and family reunification. As winter draped New York in a gentle blanket of snow, the Elena Thompson Foundation prepared for another milestone. The holiday season brought a special gathering, a celebration of 50 successful reunions, each representing a family made whole through their work. The Foundation's conservatory, now triple its original size, had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Eleanor's beloved orchids still held pride of place, but they were joined by festive decorations and twinkling lights that reflected off the glass ceiling. "Everything's ready for the families," Mrs. Martinez announced, surveying the space with satisfaction. "Rosa's outdone herself with the catering, and the youth ambassadors have prepared something special for the ceremony." Sophie and Sarah, dressed in matching blue dresses that complemented their lockets, were greeting early arrivals. Emma and Grace coordinated with the Foundation's support team, ensuring that each family felt welcomed and comfortable. "The Richardson twins are here," Emma called out, waving to the recently reunited sisters they had helped in Vancouver. "And look, they brought their whole extended family." The celebration was more than just a marker of their success. It was a testament to the healing power of truth and persistence. Families mingled freely, sharing stories and offering support to those still adjusting to their new relationships. "I remember our first meeting," Sarah said softly to a young girl who had just found her twin brother. "It feels overwhelming at first, but you'll find your rhythm. The connection was always there, waiting to be rediscovered. Alexander watched from his usual spot near Elena's portrait as the room filled with laughter and conversation. Sister Catherine had arrived from St. Mary's with some of her current charges, children who might one day discover their own hidden family connections. "Your girls have created something miraculous here," Sister Catherine said, joining him. "Not just finding lost siblings, but building a community where healing can happen naturally." The youth ambassadors began their presentation, a moving tribute to Elena's work and its continuing impact. They had compiled video messages from reunited families across the globe, each sharing how the foundation had changed their lives. "Mom's research was just the beginning," Sophie explained to the gathered crowd. "She showed us that with dedication and courage, even the most carefully hidden truths can come to light." Sarah continued, "But what we've learned is that finding each other is just the first step. Real healing happens in moments like this, when families can share their journeys and support each other through the challenges of reunion." The foundation had evolved to provide comprehensive support services. They now offered counseling, legal assistance, and ongoing community engagement for families at every stage of their journey. The Youth Ambassador Program had expanded to include training for healthcare professionals and adoption agency staff. "Look at this," Grace whispered to Emma, showing her phone. "The Singapore team just confirmed another match. Twin sisters separated at birth, one in Malaysia, one in Australia. Our 51st reunion," Emma noted with a smile. "Should we tell everyone?" But before they could share the news, the youth ambassadors called everyone's attention to a special presentation. They had created a memorial wall featuring photographs of all 50 reunited families, with Elena's portrait at the center. "Every story on this wall began with a mother's intuition," one ambassador explained. Whether it was Elena Thompson's determination to uncover the truth about her daughters, or the countless other mothers who never stopped believing they had more than one child. The ceremony continued with families adding their own photographs to the wall, each placement accompanied by tears of joy and shared embraces. The foundation's work had created a ripple effect of healing that extended far beyond the initial act of reunion. "Dad," Sophie said, joining Alexander near Elena's portrait, "do you think Mom knew how big this would become?" Alexander wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Your mother believed that truth has its own power. She knew that once we started uncovering these stories, others would find the courage to seek their own answers." Sarah joined them, followed by Emma and Grace. The four girls who had once been strangers had become not just friends but partners in continuing Elena's legacy. Their bond, forged through shared experience and purpose, was as strong as any biological connection. "We should make this an annual tradition," Grace suggested, "not just celebrating the reunions, but honoring the journey that brought us all together. And remembering that there are still more families out there," Emma added, "more stories waiting to be uncovered." As the evening progressed, Alexander observed the natural interactions between families at different stages of their journey. Those who had been reunited longer offered guidance to newly connected siblings. Parents shared their experiences of healing and integration. Even the foundation's staff and volunteers moved through the crowd with the easy familiarity of people who understood the deep emotional significance of their work. "Elena would have loved this," Mrs. Martinez said, joining their small group. "Not just the reunions, but the community you've built around them, the way you've turned individual healing into collective strength." The girls exchanged knowing smiles, their hands automatically going to their lockets, a gesture that had become symbolic of their connection to Elena's legacy. They had taken their mother's work and transformed it into something far greater than any of them had imagined possible. As snow fell gently outside the conservatory's glass ceiling, the gathered families represented a living testament to the power of persistence, truth, and love. Each reunion was a story of hope, each healing journey a reminder that it's never too late to find your way home. Spring brought new life to the Elena Thompson Foundation's gardens, where Sophie and Sarah often retreated for moments of quiet reflection. The space had been designed to honor their mother's love of growing things, with winding paths and secluded benches nestled among blooming flowers. "Can you believe it's been almost a year?" Sarah asked, touching a newly opened orchid. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in the park, and other times it seems like we've never been apart." Sophie nodded, understanding exactly what her sister meant. The past year had transformed their lives in ways none of them could have predicted. The foundation had grown from a small family mission into an international organization, yet they had managed to maintain the personal touch that made their work so effective. "Ms. Thompson?" A young intern approached hesitantly, still adjusting to the fact that this title could refer to either sister. "The team from Johns Hopkins is here for the training session." The foundation had recently launched a comprehensive training program for medical institutions, teaching them to identify potential separation cases and implement preventive protocols. Today's session would be led by all 4 girls, each sharing their unique perspective on the importance of family preservation. "Dr. Morrison's sentencing is tomorrow," Emma mentioned as they prepared for the presentation. She and Grace had arrived early to help set up the training room. "The media team wants to know if we should release a statement." The former hospital director had finally faced justice for his role in separating families. His trial had brought forward even more witnesses, each testimony adding to their understanding of how the separation scheme had operated. "I think we should focus on the positive changes his actions inadvertently sparked," Grace suggested. "How exposing the truth led to better practices and reunited families." Alexander watched from the doorway as the girls discussed their approach. They had grown so much in the past year, developing wisdom that went far beyond their years. Elena would have been amazed by their ability to find hope and purpose in even the most challenging circumstances. "The Singapore team sent their report," James announced, joining them with his ever-present tablet. 3 more matches confirmed in Southeast Asia. They're requesting our help with the reunification process. The Foundation's international expansion had required careful adaptation of their methods to different cultural contexts. The girls had shown remarkable sensitivity in understanding how family reunification might look different in various parts of the world. "We should send Sarah and Sophie," Mrs. Martinez suggested. "They have experience with cross-cultural cases, and their story resonates universally." The training session began with a full house. Medical professionals, social workers, and hospital administrators listened intently as the girls shared their experiences and introduced the Foundation's new protocols. "What we learned from our mother's research," Sophie explained, standing confidently at the podium, "is that prevention is just as important as reunion. Every family kept together is a trauma avoided." Sarah continued, "But when separation does occur, having proper documentation and transparent processes makes reunion possible. That's why we're here today, to ensure that no other families have to spend years searching for answers." Emma and Grace led the practical portion of the training, demonstrating the database systems and documentation protocols they had developed. Their own experience as recently reunited twins added credibility to their instruction. "Watch for these warning signs," Grace advised, highlighting specific patterns on the screen. Multiple birth deliveries with unusual complications, missing, or altered records, inconsistent documentation. The session was interrupted by an urgent message from the Foundation's Seattle office. Another former nurse had come forward, bringing with her records from a previously unknown hospital in Morrison's network. "She says there could be dozens more cases," Emma reported, quickly reviewing the information, "spanning almost 2 decades." The news sent a ripple of determination through the room. Even after a year of successes, they were still uncovering new layers of Morrison's operation. But now they had the resources, experience, and support network to handle whatever they found. "Mom always said the truth has a way of emerging in its own time," Sarah reflected, sharing a meaningful look with Sophie. She knew we just had to be patient and persistent. As the training session concluded, Alexander found himself in Elena's garden, surrounded by the spring blooms she would have loved. The Foundation had become everything she had hoped for and more: a force for healing, a catalyst for change, and a testament to the power of maternal love. "Sir?" Mrs. Martinez appeared with his afternoon coffee. "The girls want to show you something before the day ends." In the research center, Sophie, Sarah, Emma, and Grace had assembled a presentation. That took his breath away. They had mapped out every case the Foundation had handled, creating a visual representation of families reunited and lives transformed. "Look at this, Dad," Sophie said excitedly. "Each light represents a family we've helped. When we started, there were just the 4 of us. Now look how many lights are shining." The map glowed with countless points of light, each representing a story of loss, discovery, and reunion. But more than that, it showed the interconnected nature of their work. How each reunion created ripples that led to more discoveries, more healing, more hope. "Elena would be so proud," Mrs. Martinez whispered, wiping away tears. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." The girls smiled, their hands instinctively going to their lockets. They had taken their mother's legacy and transformed it into something extraordinary, a movement that would continue touching lives for generations to come. The morning of Dr. Morrison's sentencing dawned clear and bright, but the girls had decided not to attend the courthouse proceedings. Instead, they gathered at the Foundation for what they considered a more important event, the launch of their new global family reunification network. "Representatives from 20 countries, Emma announced, reviewing the attendance list, "all committed to implementing our protocols and sharing information across borders." The Foundation's main conference room had been transformed into a command center, with screens showing live feeds from partner organizations around the world. Each connection represented months of careful relationship building and adaptation of their methods to local contexts. "The Australian team is already online," Grace reported, adjusting the video feed. "And look, they've identified 3 potential matches using our new database system." Sophie and Sarah stood together at the main console, preparing to address their international partners. They had come so far from the frightened girls who first met in Central Park, growing into confident leaders who inspired others to join their cause. "Should we tell them about the memorial garden first?" Sarah whispered to her sister. They had been working on a special project, a peaceful space where families could come to reflect, heal, and honor their journeys. "Perfect way to start," Sophie agreed. "Show them that this work is about more than just data and DNA matches. It's about creating spaces for healing." Alexander watched from the back of the room as his daughters began the presentation. Eleanor's portrait smiled down from the wall, her presence felt in every aspect of their work. The Foundation had become everything she had hoped for, and more, a beacon of hope for separated families worldwide. The Eleanor Thompson Protocol, Sarah explained to their global audience, isn't just about finding matches. It's about supporting families through every step of their journey, from investigation through reunion and beyond. The presentation included testimonials from families they had helped, demonstrating the lasting impact of their work. The Richardson twins spoke about their experience adapting to life as sisters. The Martinez family shared how their reunion had healed generations of pain. "And now," Sophie continued, "we're expanding our youth ambassador program internationally. Because every culture has its own way of understanding family, and we need local voices to help guide our work." As if on cue, James entered, with breaking news from the courthouse. Morrison had received a significant sentence, but more importantly, he had finally expressed remorse for his actions. His statement included an apology to all the families affected by his schemes. "It's fitting," Emma observed, "that this news comes as we're launching our global network. His actions caused so much pain, but look at all the good that's come from exposing the truth." Mrs. Martinez appeared with refreshments for the team, pausing to admire the wall of success stories that now included families from multiple continents. "Eleanor always said that truth has a way of crossing borders," she remembered. She would be amazed to see how right she was. The day continued with virtual training sessions, policy discussions, and sharing of best practices across time zones. The Foundation's methods were being adapted for different legal systems and cultural contexts, while maintaining the core principles Elena had established in her research. "Dad," Sarah called during a break between sessions, "come see what the Singapore team just sent." On their main screen was a photograph of twin girls recently reunited in Malaysia, each wearing a locket similar to the ones Elena had left for Sophie and Sarah. The foundation had begun creating these special lockets for reunited siblings, carrying forward the tradition that had meant so much to their own family. "They're calling them Elena's lockets now," Grace explained. "Each one contains a small compass, symbolizing how truth helps us find our way home." As the day drew to a close, the girls gathered in their corner of the office, now more of a command center but still maintaining the intimate feel of their early days. They had made it a tradition to end each significant day by reading from Elena's research journals. "Listen to this," Sophie said, opening to a marked page. She wrote, "The truth about family isn't just in DNA or documents. It's in the heart's recognition of what was always meant to be whole." The words resonated through the quiet office, touching everyone who had become part of their extended family. The foundation staff, the international partners, the youth, ambassadors, all had been drawn together by Elena's vision of healing and hope. "She knew," Sarah said softly, touching her locket. "Somehow she knew that bringing our family's truth to light would help others find their way home too." Outside, the city was bathed in the golden light of sunset, casting long shadows through the foundation's windows. But inside, the screens continued to glow with connections to their partners around the world, each point of light representing another chance for a family to become whole again. 1 year to the day after Sarah and Sophie's first meeting in Central Park, the Elena Thompson Foundation hosted a special ceremony. The park bench where their story began had been transformed into a permanent memorial, surrounded by a beautiful garden filled with Elena's favorite orchids. "It feels different now," Sarah mused, standing with Sophie at the spot where she had first gathered the courage to speak up. "A year ago, I was so scared, but something inside me knew I had to take that chance." "And now look at us," Sophie replied, gesturing to the gathering crowd. Families from across the globe had come to celebrate the Foundation's first anniversary, each with their own story of separation, discovery, and reunion. Emma and Grace were greeting arrivals, directing them to the ceremony space where comfortable chairs had been arranged around the memorial bench. The Foundation's youth ambassadors, now numbering over 50, helped elderly relatives find seats and distributed programs printed with Elena's favorite quote about truth and healing. "Mr. Thompson," Sister Catherine approached with a group of children from St. Mary's. "The children wanted to be part of this. They've been following every story of reunion, hoping—" Alexander nodded, understanding. The Foundation had maintained close ties with orphanages and children's homes, knowing that each child's story might hold pieces of a larger puzzle. "The Malaysian team just confirmed another match," James announced quietly, showing his tablet to Alexander. "Twin boys separated at birth, now living in Singapore and Australia. They want to coordinate the reunion for next week." Mrs. Martinez appeared with a tray of Elena's special tea blend, which had become a tradition at Foundation events. She always said a warm cup of tea could help ease difficult conversations, she remembered, serving the aromatic beverage to gathered families. The ceremony began with Sarah and Sophie sharing their story, not just of finding each other, but of discovering their mother's legacy and building something meaningful from their experience. They spoke of Elena's determination, her meticulous research, and her unwavering belief that truth would find its way to light. "Our mother knew that exposing our story would help others," Sophie explained, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "But I don't think even she could have imagined how far her work would reach." A video presentation showed highlights from the past year. Families reunited across continents, hospitals implementing new protocols, young ambassadors carrying Elena's methods to new communities. Each success had created ripples that led to more discoveries, more healing, more hope. "The Foundation isn't just about finding lost siblings," Sarah continued. "It's about healing the wounds that separation creates, not just in families, but in communities and institutions." Emma and Grace presented an update on their international network, now spanning 23 countries. Their own story of reunion had helped shape the Foundation's approach to supporting families through the complex emotions of rediscovery. "When we first met Sophie and Sarah," Grace shared, "we saw what was possible. how pain could be transformed into purpose, how loss could become a catalyst for positive change. Alexander watched from near Elena's memorial as the ceremony continued. Sister Catherine spoke about the changes she'd seen in adoption practices. Dr. Collins discussed how hospitals were implementing new protocols to prevent future separations. Each speaker added another thread to the tapestry of healing their work had created. "Your wife would be so proud, Mrs. Martinez said softly, joining him. "Not just of what the foundation has accomplished, but of how the girls have grown into their roles." Indeed, watching his daughters interact with the gathered families, Alexander saw Elena's influence in every gesture, every careful word of comfort and encouragement. They had inherited her compassion, her attention to detail, and her unwavering commitment to truth. The ceremony concluded with a special tribute. Each reunited family placed an orchid at Elena's memorial, creating a living symbol of hope and renewal. The flowers, carefully chosen to bloom year-round, would serve as a reminder that growth and healing are ongoing processes. "Mom always said that gardens need constant care," Sophie reflected, watching the procession of families. "Just like the work we do, it's never really finished, but that's what makes it beautiful." Sarah nodded, touching her locket. "And every new bloom leads to another, just like every story we uncover helps us find more families who need our help." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the park's trees, the gathered families shared stories and support. Children played near the memorial garden, while parents exchanged experiences and advice. The foundation's staff and volunteers moved through the crowd, making connections and noting details that might lead to more discoveries. "Look," Emma pointed out, drawing their attention to a young girl shyly approaching the memorial. "She's from the Singapore orphanage we've been working with, the one where we think there might be more cases like ours." The girl placed her orchid with careful reverence, then turned to watch other families adding their flowers. Her expression held the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that Sarah had felt a year ago, standing in this very park. "Should we talk to her?" Grace suggested, recognizing the look in the girl's eyes. "Yes," Sophie and Sarah said together, already moving toward her. They understood better than anyone that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple conversation, a moment of connection, a shared hope for answers. As the anniversary celebration drew to a close, the Elena Thompson Foundation's core team gathered in the conservatory for a private moment of reflection. The space had become their sanctuary, filled with the orchids Elena had loved and the memories of all they had accomplished in the past year. 75 families reunited. Emma read from their latest report. Over 200 youth ambassadors trained worldwide. 15 countries implementing the Elena Thompson protocol in their healthcare systems. "And that's just the beginning," Grace added, pulling up their project board. "The Asian network is expanding. European hospitals are adopting our guidelines, and the South American initiative launches next month." Sophie and Sarah sat together on their favorite bench, surrounded by blooming orchids. Their matching lockets caught the evening light, reminding everyone of how their journey had begun. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah said softly, "what Mom would think of all this, how her research has touched so many lives." "She knows," Sophie replied with quiet certainty. "Remember what she wrote in her letter, about truth having a way of creating connections we never imagined possible?" Alexander watched his daughters, marveling at how they had grown from uncertain girls into confident young women. They had taken Elena's legacy and transformed it into something extraordinary. A global movement for truth, healing, and family. Reunification. "The Foundation received another award," James announced, showing them the email. "The International Human Rights Commission wants to recognize our work in family advocacy and healthcare reform." Mrs. Martinez brought out Elena's special tea service, a tradition they maintained for important moments. "She always said that shared stories go better with warm tea," she remembered, pouring cups for everyone. As they settled into their usual places, Catherine Bennett joined them. The journalist had become part of their extended family, helping to share their story with sensitivity and understanding. "I'm working on a book," she revealed, "about Elena's research, the Foundation's work, and all the families you've helped. Would you be willing to share your perspectives?" The girls exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations that still amazed everyone who witnessed them. "We think it's time," Sophie said finally. "Not just our story, but all the stories that have become part of the Foundation's journey." "The world needs to understand," Sarah added, "that family connections can survive anything. Time, distance, even deliberate separation. The heart always knows what's missing." Emma and Grace nodded in agreement. Their own story had become an integral part of the Foundation's narrative, showing how each reunion created ripples that led to more discoveries. "We should include the youth ambassadors' experiences too," Grace suggested. "How they're adapting our methods for different cultures and communities." "And the hospitals," Emma added. "How they're changing their practices, becoming more transparent, putting families first." Alexander moved to stand near Elena's portrait, which watched over their gathering with that gentle smile he remembered so well. "Elena believed that truth has its own power," he said softly. "That once we start listening to our hearts, the path home becomes clear." As if in response to his words, a warm breeze stirred the orchids, carrying the subtle fragrance that would always remind them of Elena. The flowers she had tended with such care had multiplied and thrived, just as her work had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. "She left us more than just research," Mrs. Martinez observed, watching the girls work on their project plans. "She left us a blueprint for healing, not just for our family, but for anyone seeking their true connections." The evening light painted the conservatory in soft gold, creating an almost magical atmosphere. In this peaceful moment, surrounded by the evidence of their year's work, they could feel the rightness of their path forward. "What's next?" Catherine asked, her notebook ready. "We keep growing," Sophie answered simply. "Keep helping families, find each other, keep improving the protocols, keep sharing what we've learned. And we never forget how it started," Sarah added, touching her locket, "with one mother's determination to uncover the truth and two sisters brave enough to trust their hearts." As they continued planning and sharing ideas, the Foundation's global network hummed with activity. Somewhere in Singapore, a girl was discovering her connection to a family in Malaysia. In Brazil, a hospital was implementing Elena's protocols for the first time. In Australia, twins separated at birth were preparing for their first meeting. Each story was unique, yet connected by the common thread of hope that Elena had first woven with her careful research. Her legacy lived on not just in the Foundation's work, but in every family reunited, every truth uncovered, every heart made whole again. "To Elena," Alexander proposed, raising his teacup, "and to all the families still finding their way home." The others joined the toast, their cups catching the last rays of sunlight. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but here in their sanctuary, surrounded by Elena's flowers and the evidence of her lasting impact, they felt the peace that comes with knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation had become more than just an organization. It was a living testament to the power of maternal love, the strength of family bonds, and the enduring nature of truth. And in the hearts of two sets of twins who had once been strangers, it was the fulfillment of a mother's final precious gift, the chance to make the world a little more whole, one family at a time.